please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, well, welcome everyone. Tonight we're actually very lucky to have a presentation from Abbott House, so we'll lead off with that, if that's all right.
Well, thank you so much for having us this evening. Learn more about what's happening on the Hill. Welcome everybody. Hello. Hi. My name is Lauren Candela-Katz, and I'm the Development Director at Abbott House. I've been here for about 10 months, and it's truly been an honor and a privilege. And I wanted to just take a moment to thank our neighbors here in the community for recognizing the important role Abbott House plays in the community. And I'm truly astounded because everywhere I go, I either meet a current Irvington resident or somebody who used to live in Irvington who Abbott House was their very first volunteer experience. And these are people who continue to be involved in the community and help our communities thrive. So Abbott House has really played an integral role to thriving, making our communities thrive. I want to share just a couple little stories. One is about a little boy named Anthony. When he was 4 years old, his father passed away, and his mother had an addiction problem. By the time he was 7, Anthony had to be removed by the state from his home. And they removed him, they removed his brother, they removed his sister, and they were all separated, and they went everywhere. A few months later, they came to Abbott House. And just picture if your own child had to be removed from the only home that they've ever known. He came to Abbott House, and we cared for him. He stayed with us for 8 years. We provided school, clothing, love and support, recreational, like basketball, counseling, medical care, you name it. He got it so that he could figure out how he could see a better future for himself. And I met Anthony several months ago when I first came to Abbott House because he came to show his girlfriend and her son the only place that he's ever called home. And to see the staff that were the only people who ever showed any kindness and care and support for him. And he still keeps in touch with them. And Anthony today owns a barbershop, and he coaches basketball and mentors kids. And then I want to tell you about another girl named Carolina. She is a lovely adolescent who came to us in very bad shape emotionally, who had no prospects for a future, but our staff saw a glimmer of hope in her and worked with her and brought her out of her shell and discovered that she was a beautiful artist and that she had such great abilities and capabilities and helped her figure out a dream for the future. And that was going to college and getting an art degree. And they helped her figure out how to apply to Plattsburgh. And she just finished her first year at Plattsburgh. And I tell these stories because these kids don't think that they're worth anything. We have toy drives and we get thank you notes from kids. And one little boy said, "Thank you so much. I don't know why you wasted your money to give me something, your hard-earned money." That's what these children, they come from these circumstances that we can never imagine going through, and yet here they are. And that's what Abbott House does. And so as the years progressed, research showed us that having kids in institutions was not the best thing for them, that they do much better when they're in the community. And so Abbott House changed their model of care. We began to recruit more foster parents so that instead of coming and staying at Abbott House, they were in the closest thing to a family setting that they could possibly be in. So we recruited 250 foster parents, so kids no longer stayed in the building up on the hill. They were out in the community. And when we didn't have foster parents caring for them, they stayed in group homes for transitional periods until we could find foster families for them. Our goal is always to reunite the children with their families. It's to stabilize the families and to reunite them with the families. And we have a great success rate in that. But when that's not possible, we try to find another permanent home for them through adoption. In addition to that, we have community school programs where we try to prevent kids from getting into the care system, where we work with their families to support them. We have 2 programs in the Bronx that we care for. Today they come to the building primarily for medical care and for counseling services. They come when they attend with their foster parents, who we train monthly and support them monthly, and when they come, they participate in life skills programs. So that's the extent that the kids are in the building today. Over time, we also saw that there were a lot of children coming into the system who had developmental disabilities. And we developed a special expertise in caring for children and adults with developmental disabilities, and we expanded our program in 1992 to care for adults with disabilities. And we have 16 rehabilitation programs, or 16 residences and 2 rehabilitation programs. And I have to say, I have a developmentally disabled nephew, and they're just such loving human beings, and our goal is always to celebrate their abilities and their interests, and to help them have a safe and meaningful and dignified life. So whether it's with children or families or individuals, that's the goal, is really to celebrate their abilities and their strengths, to help them meet their fullest potential, to help create thriving families and thriving communities, because when we work together to help people thrive, it benefits all of us. And so a couple years ago, when we were asked to take on a short-term program to care for children who came into this country without a parent, it was a natural fit for us, and of course we said yes. And then we were asked to reapply for a longer-term grant, got the top rating, and we just won that grant. So I'd like to call on Jimmy Armstrong, who's been with Abbott House, I just found out, since I've been 3 years old, to tell you a little bit about our TRC program.
Started working when I was 3. So actually, I've been working at the Abbott House, and first of all, thank you guys for inviting us, man.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you for the board being here. Thank everybody for coming out. It's a pleasure to come in and talk about the program. I actually started working at Abbott House in 1969, fresh out of college. I came up, I worked, I actually retired, I believe in 2004. When I got the TRC program, I decided to come back and do the educational piece of that program. As we said, we had that program in 2014. It lasted 18 months. I think we did a fantastic job with that program. And now, in March of this year, we got the program for 3 years. So I was working in White Plains, and in fact, I'm still working 1 day a week. I had to commit to continue to work until the end of the school year. I came back because I made a promise, and I believe if you make a promise, you need to keep the promise. So I came back, but anytime you've been associated with an agency for so many years, 48 years, you come back to the program. I knew that that program was a great program. So I'm going to just talk a little about the program. I had just a few things written down in my notes about the program because I believe that we do a great job. And I'm not saying it because I'm associated with the program. If I didn't believe that they did a good program, guess what? I wouldn't have come back the first time, and I surely would not have come back the second time. So what we do now, we have 35 students now. Let me tell you what the TRC means. One of the things that I always hated, I remember when I first started working, I was at a meeting, they said BCW. And I spent half of the meeting trying to figure out what BCW was, and I'm sure I lost focus of what it was. TRC means Transitional Resources for Children. And that's simple as a name. We have to give the program a name. Weathermind Ideal, I think it's a good name because it really describes what it is. Transition. The students who come in are in transition. Students who leave Honduras or wherever they're coming from, they are transitioning to get to this country so they can try to make a better life for themselves. The type of students we have. Now, the students, actually we can accept students from ages infants to 17.6. And when I was told about 17.6, I said, why are we using 17.6? Why don't we just say infants to 17? Well, the federal government have guidelines, and we tend to want to follow those guidelines. So it's 17.6. Now, we do not keep students in this program beyond 18. If they hit their 18th birthday, they have to be out. That's by law. We cannot keep them in. So I know the last time we had only one situation where we had students that stayed up until that point. 2 days before they was 18, the federal government, they sent someone in to pick them up, and they took them, and they processed them in a different way. So one of the things that we do in terms of caring for students, Abbott House has the contract, but you have a contract, and everyone who is associated with any child care agency know there are several things you have to provide. You have to provide food, shelter, you have to provide care, and you have to provide schooling. And I'm going to tell you something. Any institution that do not get an A rating in that really do not need to stay open. You need to close their doors, because those are basic things that everybody needs. I don't care who you are, you need those basic things. But in addition to those 4 things, Abbott House has the primary responsibility for what they call reunification of families. And it's their responsibility to make sure that these students who come in, many of them come in with telephone numbers, they come in with addresses, and we have a staff, about 7 individuals, whose primary job is to work with these individuals to make sure they unify these individuals with families. Now, families could be mom, dad, could be grandma, could be granddaddy, could be aunt, uncles, cousins. There are some cases that it could be a friend, but that friend has to have demonstrated that they have been involved in the life of that child. Can just anybody come up and say, because we don't want our kids to be taken advantage of by somebody we sent them. So these individuals make sure that they check on the situation, they make telephone calls, they sometimes call the counselors back at the other places that they have come from. They do everything they can to make sure that we're sending these kids to places that are safe. And we don't want kids to come here and then we send them somewhere and they're going to be exploited. We really don't want that. So I think we have done a pretty good job in making sure. I know the last time around, I think there was maybe 2 or 3 situations that we were not able to send kids to family or very close friends. And in those cases, we end up sending the kids to institutions that dealt with those type of kids, or we send them to foster home. So, you know, we're in the community. It's ideally to know the type of kids that you get in the community, because that would be one of the questions that I would ask if I was in the community. What type of kids are you getting? You're getting kids that, I'm the educational coordinator. I had 2 cases in 18 months that students had to come to my office. And after they left out, I really laughed. I mean, I had to giggle for why they came to my office in terms of what they call a discipline problem. One kid said, I just don't want to learn English. And so he just refused to do work. Obviously, that's not a discipline problem, but that's okay. Came in, I treated it as a discipline problem. I made a deal with students. I say, now, I don't speak Spanish, you don't speak English. If you come in and you can teach me English for 2 days a week for 20 minutes, I will teach you. You teach me Spanish, I teach you English. Now, that was a small thing. The kid was so excited. I mean, he went back to the classroom, he started doing his work, but guess what? I think I told him 10 o'clock on a Thursday morning. 9:55 of Thursday morning, he said by my office door. I said, you know, he had an interpreter with him. I said, what do you want? He said, I think we got class today. I said, oh my God, I did put myself. So those were the kind of kids we had. The kids were eager to learn English. They were eager to be unified with a family that they could feel safe. Because I'm going to tell you, some of the stories that they tell you sometimes would bring tears to your eyes in terms of what they came through. So I'm just happy to be a part of a program that I think we're helping kids to come in. And I can tell you one thing, in working with the community, you're not going to have any problems. We're going to make sure we take care of our kids and going to make sure that you guys be a part of helping us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
In your folders, we just have some information about volunteer opportunities and some newsletters that you can just get a deeper feel for what we do. I'm always available to answer any questions, and we would love to have the community involved. So I'll leave some of the folders here.
We'll take one up here. Share. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much for having us.
Well, thank you, guys. We appreciate you coming in and give us the update. I actually have 3 foster brothers, so foster care is very near and dear to my heart. So, and I'm your neighbor. My bedroom window looks out on Abbott House. So,
Okay.
so keeping the noise down. But thank you very much for coming out for the evening.
And thank you for inviting us.
Karen?
If I may just add one more thing to the eloquence of Lauren and my longtime friend. We all feel, I think, very strongly about vulnerable children, and particularly these children who are undocumented and unescorted. But there's another vulnerable community that Lauren just mentioned briefly, but the developmentally disabled, with all the group homes in the area. I think most everybody here probably shops up at the Stop and Shop up on 119. And Stop and Shop is wonderful about employing the developmentally disabled. And one of them in particular, I would like to call to your attention, and I hope you will greet him the next time you go up there, because he's a long time resident of one of Abbott House's group homes in Elmsford. His name is Howard. Everyone knows Howard, but if you go early in the day, just say hello to Howard. And Howard is one of the long-term resident in one of the houses there in Elmsford, and you might see him sometime. He walks back and forth, and it's so remarkable. But he is also one of our childlike but middle-aged people, and I don't know if you're aware of this, but the developmentally disabled age at a much faster rate than does the regular public. And this is one of the challenges of Abbott House now too, because these group homes have to be upgraded and changed for older people like me, who can't get around quite as well as they used to. And this is particularly true in the group homes. So please consider that also as one of the big challenges of Abbott House community. And the next time you're at the Stop and Shop, please say hello to Howard. Even if he doesn't know you, he'll say, "How you doing today?" So anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Karen. So we're going to run quickly through announcements. First, the acceptance of a donation from the Rivertowns Lions Club. I assume, Larry, I didn't have any backup for this one, but I assume this is for the for the DARE program. That's been what they've given us the last several years. So thank you once again to the Rivertowns Lions Club. 2 meetings, both for the Route 9 Active Corridor Study Public Workshop. The first one's Thursday, June 15th, 7 p.m. at the Hastings Community Center. And the other one is Saturday, June 17th at 1 p.m. at the Warner Library in Tarrytown. This is, of course, the group that the grant money was for, that's going to be looking at kind of a complete streets idea for Broadway. There's 5 communities involved. I guess it's from Hastings all the way up to Sleepy Hollow. They're having 2 meetings, one in the evening during the week in Hastings, and one on Saturday during the day. So,
Could I add one thing to that?
sure.
There's been a little bit of perhaps misapprehension in some of the public, not necessarily in Irvington, but I know it's going to some of the other communities. This is just the introduction to the project. The project is a kind of a conceptual design project that the funding is received for. So this is not, there's nothing on paper yet. There's no they're not presenting the final design. They're not trying to figure out anything about implementation yet. It's purely to get the public involved at the start of the process of defining what it is the communities want to see. So it's really square one. I think there was, like I said, I think there was
Right,
some
that's, yeah, I
misunderstanding.
think this, my understanding is just almost not brainstorming, but they want to hear what the public wants to see in the Route 9 corridor. If it's, more bikes, more walking, more whatever it is. So this is a great opportunity to have, I think, to have your voice heard, is my understanding. So that's again, Thursday, June 15th, 7 p.m. Hastings Community Center, and Saturday, June 17th, 1 p.m. at Warner Library in Tarrytown. Which you can go to that on Saturday, and then Sunday is Celebrate Irvington Day. Connie, you want to give us a quick?
Well, I know I don't want to spend much time on this, but if you've seen these notices around, this is the Celebrate Irvington Day. If you're a business on Main Street and you want to put things out on the sidewalk that day, it's a day, it's not a fundraiser, it's a day for the community and for visitors, and it's a way for us to appreciate our own little unique downtown businesses, and it's Father's Day. It's a good day to take your father on the trolley. There's a lot of food. Or walk. There are 2 guided walks. So there are a lot of history things and a lot of downtown kind of appreciation of our downtown, and to the extent that businesses are open, we hope that there's a lot of foot traffic. So come. Thank you.
And Brian will be
Oh,
at noon
yes.
in Village Hall. Will be giving out awards for the 2nd annual PSA Walk Safe video contest.
There are a whole schedule of things. There are theater things, there are
Gotta
music
come.
things, there are Girl Scout
Yeah.
things, there are walking school bus things, but I didn't think we should take that much time. But thank you, Mark, for pointing that out about the video.
Another announcement, there's a public meeting to present the recommended updates to the village's comprehensive plan. Project that's been going on for, I guess solidly for the last 5 months, something like that. So this is kind of the committee's findings, the presentation to the comprehensive plan committee, and it's the comprehensive plan committee's presentation of that, so where we are in that phase. I think the only last thing I'll add is we had a great event last night at the O'Hara Nature Center. It was a really nice day, even though it was not the best weather. We made the best of it. Luckily, we have a lovely nature center to be inside of. It was a kind of a fundraiser, but it was also a kickoff for ideas of how to use the nature center. We've had it open for about 5 years now. The grounds look amazing. If you haven't been out there recently, definitely go check it out. But that was just a great night.
And who designed that building?
He got tired of that last night. Does anyone else have anything else? Otherwise, I'm moving on to correspondence. The correspondence that's related either to the leaf blowers or the historic district, I'm not going to address right now. We had 3 other pieces of correspondence non-related to those 2 items. First was from Patrick Gilmartin, who's pointing out the other post-retirement employee benefits. There is a GASB, or Government Accounting Standard Board, change that's coming out this year, which is going to put a hard number on basically what we owe for things other than pensions. It's surprisingly large. I don't know, not surprising actually. It's really large numbers. The kind of unfunded for about, say, 2x our annual budget, both for the school and for the village. This is all throughout New York State. Some of the numbers are even scarier. I think it's almost $2 billion for Westchester County, and Greenberg's again is $250 million, and the New York State is $68.2 billion. So I think really what Patrick wanted us to do was be aware of this. I think we have been aware of it. Interestingly enough, if we all said right now, you all took out your checkbooks and gave me $1 million each to pay down the school and our debts, there's nothing we could do with it because New York State doesn't actually allow us to put money aside. Yes, we could just put money aside, but then future board could spend it on whatever they wanted. So this is really a bigger problem than Irvington. I think what we've done on a local level to control this is we've been trying to limit hires. Our headcount's down in the village by, I think, approximately 8 people or 9 people since 2009. Obviously, each one of those people we haven't replaced doesn't have pension, doesn't have health care benefits in the future. So that's been a big driver. It's not even today's salaries that are the biggest cost, it's the future cost. We've been very cognizant of that as a board. Patrick also asked us if we could push our state lawmakers to start addressing this problem. I agree. I have talked to Tom Abenanti about it, and they're aware of it as well. It's just it is a political hot button. I think we're going to need to see other states do it. It's not just New York State; it's all over the country. New York State's pensions are actually in better shape than most, but it's a very large problem, and we're happy to do our part. But I don't think we're going to solve it tonight. We have some other things to talk about. So, Allison O'Connor would like to draw the Board of Trustees' attention to a property that's just come on the market. Listing states there's currently a well-situated 8,500 square foot vintage mansion in lovely condition located in the easternmost portion. Should be retained if desired. That's at 76 North Broadway. Please add this to your agenda so something doesn't happen like it did at the Fee Building on South Broadway. I think we're aware it's on the market. There's not really much we can do. The area was upzoned, so it's not as much can be built there as could have been in the past, but we will monitor it. But
Which building is that?
Maxon building.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yeah, the whole area. And lastly, Cheryl Brandywine, the residents of South Buckout Street respectfully request information about the remedial measures planned for the Astorbuck lots. There are several areas that have been completely bulldozed, including the utility easement adjacent to the Greenberg residence at 100 South Buckout, and the village property adjacent to 50 South Buckout. The Astorbuck received permission to use heavy machinery to bulldoze to the village and Con Ed Verizon Properties. Our building inspector has been monitoring what they've been doing down there. They didn't need permits for the work they did, but we want to ensure that they do reseed it or whatever, so we prevent any kind of erosion that would happen in that area, and we expect them to bring it back to an acceptable condition. I think we had an update that part of it had been redone today, so ongoing situation. That's it for correspondence for that part. Any public comment not related to either leaf blowers or the historic district? Nothing else, no other burning issues. Maybe I should have paused.
I was hoping this would be an announcement, Nikki Cotting from 57 Hillside Terrace. But we have the village, including the O'Hara Nature Center and the village library, are sponsoring, and the Greenberg Nature Center, are together sponsoring a composter and rain barrel sale at great discount prices. You can order online through June 22nd, and village, the pickup is at the village library down on Astor. And the website will be publicized on the village website and through emails, hopefully. But you can just Google Westchester Composter Sale, and you can find it. But we're really hoping to keep some organic waste out of the waste stream and save the village some money and the environment.
Is there a note to put it on the next one, Mayor?
And there is one up in Village Hall to look at, one of the
Yes,
examples.
there's a sample composter and a sample rain barrel as well. And the library is sponsoring a master composter on pickup day to demonstrate and answer your questions.
Any other public comment? Another turn at the end. Anyway, next we're on the consent agenda. Anyone on the board have questions on the consent agenda? Otherwise, I will make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Carried.
Wanted to point out there are some seats up here, if I noticed. You don't put your life standing, or you prefer sitting?
Otherwise, I will make a motion to open the public hearing to consider a local law amending Chapter 148 nuisances of the Irvington Code to limit the use of leaf blowers. Can I have a second?
Second.
All in favor? The public meeting is now open. Mary, do you want to give a quick overview?
Basic provisions are that, where's the number?
It's number 8.
Yeah, thanks, sorry, I didn't, try to read what was in it. But, what it does, the main provision is that during the, spring and fall cleaning, what? Main provision is that gas-powered leaf blowers can't be used, except in these situations. During the spring and fall cleanup periods, which are March 15th through May 15th, and September 15th through December 15th. And during that period, they can only be used on Monday through Friday between 8 and 5, Saturdays, Sundays, and holidays between 10 and 4. So other than March 15th to May 15th and September 15th to December 15th, they can't be used. They can be used, however, on multifamily and cluster residential developments and attached one-family dwelling developments, meaning like townhouse developments. And they can be used any days there, but only between 9 a.m. and noon on Monday through Friday, and not at all on Saturdays, Sundays, and holidays. Because it's assuming that it'll be staff that's doing those things rather than individuals when they come home from work. And the ban doesn't apply to golf and tennis clubs, municipal and school employees that are doing their, regular services. It doesn't apply when it's responding to an emergency or when removing snow. Another limitation is that walk-behind leaf blowers can't be used. The kind that you push can't be used unless the property that's being cleaned is greater than half an acre. And again, unless the property is greater than half an acre, you can only use one leaf blower, backpack or handheld leaf blower, unless the property is bigger than half an acre. And no gas blowers can be used that don't meet whatever the current Environmental Protection Agency standards are. And then there's the penalty provision that goes to the property owner or the tenant on whose property the leaf blower is being used rather than the person doing the leaf blowing. And it's a penalty of $100 for the first offense and $250 for any subsequent offense.
So I thought maybe we'd hear from the public first, rather before we speak.
Do you want to summarize? I don't know if you want to go through the correspondence now. Just
I could, except that I thought maybe if someone's here, that I wouldn't have to read their letter. They can do their own, and then if they're not here, I will read their letter.
Sure.
So, can I come up first? Sure.
Good evening, everyone. I'm a local landscaper in town, Those Guys Landscaping. My name is Patrick Valentino. It's a good deal in here that I believe it's absurd. I guess I'll just start at the top. And first question is, who came up with all these limitations and guidelines? Who compiled
A
them?
lot of them were based on other municipalities, and things that we've got, that the board's talked about for the last 6 months. And then we had, I'd say 2 years ago, we had also drafted a law that was tabled for over a year, maybe a year and a half. Then we dusted it off, I don't know, say 6 months ago.
Is there any reason why it's extremely strict over other municipalities? I know Tarrytown is Tarrytown's June 15th to September 15th, does not limit equipment and sizes, and does not limit it to smaller properties. Sleepy Hollow, they're a little longer, it's May 24th to September 30th, but they as well do not limit size, equipment, and limit to smaller properties. I sent out a letter to my customers explaining that the expenses are going to go way up for leaf removal. They already did when you stop picking up bulk leaves. This is a noise and nuisance ordinance. Was it taken into consideration that, this is the example I gave to my customers. 3 workers are performing leaf removal at a half-acre property for 25 to 35 minutes, and the job is complete with great outcome. With this new enclosed code, there will only be 1 blower used for leaf cleanup, which can now take who knows how long, given wet leaves, wind, and you're definitely not going to have as clean of an outcome, and you're going to have to charge your customer more. I mean, how does that, what's the risk-benefit there? I mean, I understand the noise, but instead of being out of a property next to your house, Mr. Mayor, we're there for maybe 15, 20 minutes, and now you're there for 2 hours. How is that helping with noise? Also with limiting and in size, yeah, I think a big blower on most smaller properties, less than half acre, is a little carried away. But like I said, if you have wind or wet leaves, it's very hard to pick those up with smaller blowers, and not to mention 1 blower. I mean, you're talking all of Main Street, Station Road, Sycamore Lane, a lot of houses on Harriman, East Irvington. A lot of those properties are under half an acre. Just trying to go over my notes here, see if I'm missing anything. You failed to mention for golf and tennis clubs and municipality and school employees, they can only use a blower if it's not within 100 feet of the nearest residence. All these properties that you just named in this one limitation definitely are residential within 100 feet. So I hope that's enforced as it's written. Is there any reason why you're cutting down the hours for blowers for noise ordinance? You're kind of putting a noose on landscapers. It's like taking a hammer out of a carpenter's hand.
I mean, I think where most of the, in one of my, where I've kind of moved around a bit, is every complaint we've received so far are about landscapers, not particularly you guys, but, and it's typically what happens is the Station Road area. It's one landscaper gets kind of 4 properties, right? So someone starts up their 3 blowers, and they start at 8 in the morning, and they don't finish until 1 p.m., say. And they almost keep them on the entire time. And I think part of it is you see the guy chasing 1 leaf, 3 guys chasing 1 leaf because it looks the best. Yeah. And I think that there's kind of a trade-off between getting every single leaf, which I know as a landscaper you want it to look, but you want it to look pristine, as clean as it can be.
Absolutely.
Versus if, like I did my lawn for 15 years, I never blew my, after I mowed, I was done. If I did a little weed whacking, it was really good. The only thing I ever blew was with an electric blower, kind of the walkway, so there wasn't grass clippings. So I think that there's, it's almost like, to me, some of the bad behavior of certain landscapers has pushed this to the forefront, and I think that's what we're trying to address. And the other question I have for you, I'm glad we have a landscaper here, is for the places that do have bans, and many of them have for 10 years. What do you do in the summertime? How is your work different?
We do have battery blowers, which don't last the whole day. I mean, I think the battery's like $200 a piece, so that's kind of ridiculous to go out and buy enough to take care of everybody. We don't blow off roadways, we don't blow off driveways, we don't blow off pools or decks. We literally just blow off the walkway, so people don't track grass into their house. We also use catchers to limit the grass that's blowing everywhere. Like I said, I mean, it's definitely going to be a decline in service, and we'll have to deal with it. It's fine in Sleepy Hollow entire time. We do deal with it. They're actually extremely strict within those months, the block period. We've had the cops arrive a couple times and we try to push the limits a little bit, just pulling a little something off quick. But as you just mentioned, with starting the leaf blowers at 8 a.m. on Station Road and finishing at 1 p.m., you have 3 guys. Now that you have 1 guy, those blowers are running all day long. I just hope you guys can take into consideration that this isn't set in stone. And also one more point. May 15th, a lot of your flowering trees and saplings from trees, they're still not there. I mean, I'm even fine with June 1st to September 30th. But May 15th, I mean, even with the late snowfall, we didn't start our cleanups this year until April 13th. We didn't finish until maybe close to the end of May. Plus with all the rain too, considering you might not be able to get out there and work. So we also have to take the weather into consideration, and I mean, honestly, I think with all these limitations and guidelines, you're taking tools out of our hands. That's, it's kind of necessary for those time periods, especially during leaf cleanup and spring cleanups. Everybody wants their lawn beautiful. I know there's the whole Love 'em and Leave 'em campaign. I have one person that does that, and their lawn looks terrible because of it. You leave leaves, you mulch them over the winter, you leave them. Grass doesn't grow the right way in the spring. Now you have to thatch everything, you have to reseed, aerate, fertilize. I mean, you're just increasing costs to have a nice lawn with doing these methods, and also you're increasing costs to provide a service to people within these guidelines and limitations. So I would just ask that if this isn't set in stone, I see that it's going into effect July 1st, that you guys will reconsider. I'd be more than happy to come in and discuss with you guys in a meeting. Like I said, I'm not against the blower ban. It's just that it's like you guys took every limitation from other municipalities and put them all into one. So, I mean, like I said, we can deal with it in Sleepy Hollow and Tarrytown, and we can work around it, but there's a lot that we have to deal with in this new code.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Please.
Good evening, I'm Alan Choate. I'm here on behalf of the Field Point Community Association, and we just wanted to make a record of our request for a full exemption, such as the exemption that you're proposing for municipal employees, school employees, and golf and tennis clubs. We don't know what your criteria were for the full exemptions that you gave. We assumed that one of the criteria was the size of the entity. Field Point is a 103-acre property, and at 103 acres, we're almost as large as the golf club, and we're twice as large as all of the school district properties put together. So just based on that, we would hope that we might be qualified for a full exemption. In addition, we have a unique situation where we're actually required to maintain some of our woodlots, not for our benefit, but for the benefit of all the roads that intersect Field Point from Cedar Ridge, because we're required to give safe, passable walking on all of the trails from Cedar Ridge through Field Point to the school district property. So keeping the woods clean is another significant bit of landscaping and blowing that we need to do. It's been my impression from watching the work session, just from what you said tonight, that a lot of your issues are geared towards the blocks that have 10 homes on one side and 10 homes on the other side, and therefore the potential to be subjected to blowers 20 times a week at whatever time. And in Field Point, our landscaper is there from a day to a day and a half each week. It's never there on Sundays, and because of the size of the property, you don't hear the noise in any one given location for more than a half hour or 40 minutes once a week. So we're renewing our request for a full exemption, because to have an exemption to use blowers for 3 hours in the morning is just going to make it more noisy, because it will take more days for our landscapers with their blowers to go through the property. So we'd appreciate any consideration you can give to our request. We think it's actually better for us to have this exemption, do everything that we have to do in a day to a day and a half, and not create additional noise for everyone. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Alison O'Connor. I live on West Clinton Avenue. I used to live on 36th Street, and it was a lot quieter on 36th Street than it actually is on West Clinton Avenue some days. I come out of my house some days and I cannot think straight, because there are multiple blowers on either side of my property. But that's why we're here. We understand it is a nuisance to certain people, but what I'd really like to point out to everyone, I do understand that it is a challenge for both landscapers and property owners, but I think we've got a moral responsibility here. I don't think any of you need me to tell you the environmental impacts and the noise pollution impacts that leaf blowers have on the environment. You know, just one random fact that I was reading today is, you know, half an hour of leaf blowing is equivalent to 400 miles or 400 kilometres, you know, running a car. The toxins and the contaminants that come out of leaf blowers is really severe. In light of, recent events going on in the news. I think we've just got a moral responsibility to really do the best for our town and our village. You're doing a wonderful job with all of these other environmental initiatives like the Leaving the Leaves, and so I'd just like to add that I think we really need to think about the environmental impact amongst the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Next. Well, you're up, ready. Sure.
I'm Robert Tardy. I live in Cedar Ridge. I sent you a letter. You probably have my letter there.
Yeah, no, I don't have to read it.
I just want to represent individual homeowners. I mean, I totally agree that there needs to be some restriction. I fully appreciate the fact that when the lawn services get to Cedar Ridge, they go house to house, and it's absolutely deafening because there are sometimes 5 guys at a time all walking with leaf blowers. I'm an individual homeowner. I care for my own yard. I always have. I take a lot of pride in it. I have a backpack leaf blower. I use it for 10 minutes on Saturday to basically clear my deck and my walkway and get the pollen and the debris off. I've surveyed my neighbors. Nobody has an issue with me using it. I feel like that individual homeowners are being penalized because of the abuses of lawn services. And the irony is that people who don't care for their own lawns are using lawn services, and they're creating this problem. So I would strongly ask the village to consider. I mean, I'm okay with time restrictions, and I don't, just out of courtesy to my neighbors, I would never use any lawn equipment before 10 a.m. on a Saturday. And past 5. I would ask that the village consider allowing individual homeowners to use one, gas-powered leaf blower during limited hours on weekends, because that's when I have to do my yard. I'm not home during the week. I work in the city. I can't do it in the evening, so I just feel strongly that we're being penalized. People who actually do their own work and care for their own yard should be allowed to use one leaf blower for a limited amount of time, during the summer months.
Okay. Thank you very much.
I'm Mark Keefe. My wife and I live at 85 North Broadway. Dark Corners with me. She wrote this letter and submitted it to you, and I'd just like to read it for the benefit of everybody else. Like many Irvington residents, I work primarily from home, so often as I sit to start work, the landscaping crews of my neighbors arrive. There are always 3 or 4 men working at a time with gas-powered lawnmowers, edgers, and leaf blowers running simultaneously. As they finish the yard to the back of me, they move to the house on the right, and after that walk with their machines running to the house on the left. The noise and dust does not last for just half an hour, but for 1.5 to 2 hours. On days that I'm outside my own yard when the crews arrive, I'm forced to retreat indoors in order to avoid both the deafening noise and the high-velocity air jets coming from the gas-powered leaf blowers, which whip up dust and effectively remove the topsoil. An analysis of this flying dust, quote, has revealed allergens, molds, pollens, animal feces, pesticides, and toxic metals. We'll provide that reference for anybody who's interested. This is not what I care to inhale. It is not something that can be healthy for anyone walking by to breathe in, or, of course, for the landscaping workers themselves. Over the 17 years we have lived in our house, we have always mulched, mowed the lawn, and left the clippings to decompose in place, and mulched fallen leaves and added them to our garden beds. Over time, the soil has grown increasingly healthy, is teeming with life, and is very easy to dig in and plant. There are definitely more birds coming to our yard to feed and nest, as well as more insects, chipmunks, possums, and garter snakes, a real indicator of a healthy environment. Since the soil is healthy, we have no need for fertilizers to grow vigorous plants, and since our backyard is a balanced ecosystem, we have no need for pesticides, as the predators are there to deal with any pests. More and more people are demanding organic food, earth-friendly cleaning supplies, and even organically produced clothing. With education, it follows that people would embrace the benefits of more earth-friendly ways of taking care of their yards and demand quieter and safer yard care. Enterprising landscapers would, we're sure, find ways to satisfy this demand. The proposed village amendment restricts the use of gas-powered leaf blowers to spring and fall cleanup periods, since there is minimal leaf fall from December 15th to March 15th and May 15th to September 15th. This seems like a very obvious step in the right direction. We would hope that this amendment would be the first of many changes to our village code, which would aim to improve the quality of life within our village as well as encourage more environmentally sound landscaping practices. Thank you.
Come on up, Chet, but one other piece of correspondence we received was from Carl Falcone on Circle Drive, who says he agrees with the principles of those guys' landscaping, which was Pat Valentino. I'm going to get that one here since I don't even remember what Pat said.
Good evening. I'm Chet Norton. I live on 3 Lewis Road, and I appreciate the ordinance that you crafted. I think it's long overdue. I take care of my yard myself. I use a brake and a broom. I compost in place and have a compost pile, and it works just fine. And I feel if I can do that, I think anybody should be able to do that. And I also have an office in my house, and I too am subjected to the army of men with leaf blowers moving down Lewis Road, and it's a real distraction. So again, thank you for your work.
Hi, everybody. I've spoken to the board once before. My name is Kathy Byfield, and I live in the Spiro Park neighborhood on Maple and Station, and we are definitely one of the houses that are subjected to just an onslaught of leaf blowers at all times. I have 3 young children, ages 1, 3, and 5, and there are many, many, many days that we cannot go out and play in our own yard. And to me, that's a quality of life issue, and it's a health issue. Also, I'd like to add that the EPA has found that noise levels over 75 decibels cause hearing loss, especially in children. Leaf blowers within 50 feet can be 90 to 100 decibels. So this is a public health issue. I'm not anti-landscaper, but I do think I am anti-leaf blower for sure, and I really hope you don't make the restrictions any bigger. To your point, April was, and a lot of April was ruined for us. May 15th is, if we have to live with that, that's great. Tarrytown has a ban every weekend of the year, and Hastings has a ban all year round. So, I don't think this is out of the ordinary. These landscapers do know how to do this. There are other means to pick up leaves. I'm not asking for your lawn to look terrible, but some of the other people have said, we do our own lawn as well. My husband's garden is to the sky, and we compost and we let the leaves sit there. And that's all I can say. It's a public health issue, and I want my kids to play in their own yard. Thanks so much.
Sure. I think she was coming up.
Her.
You go next.
Hi. Okay. I'm Ann Altman. I live in Spiral Park with my daughter Margaret here, who's 2, and John over there, who's 7. And just to back up what Kathy said, we're not anti-landscaper, but we are being abused by landscaping companies. I'm going to just let Margaret play this. Okay, just push that button. Let's see if it's gonna work. It worked earlier during the meeting, but that other stuff. Anyway, so this is, you could hear this at 100 decibels, which is what we hear it at, because I have a decibel reader on my phone, and I stand in my window of my house, and I read, it's 85 to 100 in my house. In my house. I just have to say that, everybody. In my house. That's how loud it is. So, the children have landscaping earphones that they wear when we go to pick up my son at Dow's Lane, which we have to walk by the companies abusing the gas leaf blowers. In my opinion, any use of a gas leaf blower is abuse because they are so incredibly polluting, and so innocuous looking that no one is taking it seriously. So noise aside, pollution aside, this is a 7-day-a-week issue. Right now you have a ban that is for the summer. That's great. But it's saying that you can pollute the rest of the year and it's okay. And I haven't been in a lawn since the 1970s and 80s. Our lawn looked great. So the point is, the standard of what a good lawn is has to be changed. It's not a manicure. It's not supposed to look like the carpet in your house. It's grass, for crying out loud. And grass isn't even native, so let's not even talk about that. But homeowners need to understand a leaf on your grass is supposed to be there because it's outside. Okay? I should not be subjected to your personal manicure because you can't have a manicure that's in your own house if it's dealing with your lawn, and it is not okay. It is not okay to pollute the air, and it is not okay to pollute the air with noise. It's not okay. Yes. Yeah. So, I think that's all I'd like to say. I think I've made my point pretty clear that if you have one of these manicured lawns, I look at it and it makes me sick because I know that it tortured somebody. It tortured a neighbor who happens to be home, a neighbor with a child who's trying to nap, someone who's trying to concentrate on something. And there's no one there to monitor it. What am I supposed to do? I call the police? I don't know. I'm getting judged because my lawn isn't manicured. Is that what it is? People are afraid that their lawns are going to look like mine. Well, we just moved here, and I'm raising my kids. My lawn will look nice when they're a little older, and I had a chance to be able to work on it better. However, these gas leaf blower guys, we call them stormtroopers, come. They show up, here comes the van. We know that we're screwed for 4 hours, and we have nowhere to go. They leave them running when they're doing something else. They leave the mowers running when they're working on the gas leaf blowers. It's negligence, and it's completely horrible. And Irvington should do better. As a country, we can do better. These are choices we have to make. We have to start changing the way we're doing things. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Rich Orlando. I really didn't come here for this subject, but I'm hearing some interesting things. And believe me, I know they're annoying. And, you know, when I'm outside working on Saturday, cutting, working on building or whatever, they bother me. But I'm making noise here. But anyway, you can't mandate. I mean, people take care of the lawns. When I was young, there weren't landscapers like this. We did them. We went around, we cut them. You didn't have a decision. But now, you know, everybody wants a nice lawn, and it's going to happen. And you're not going to go back there and everybody on Saturday cutting the grass. But, you know, a lot of good points here. You made some good points.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, MJ Wilson, 6 Cedar Lawn Road, and I am the acting chair of the Green Policy Task Force, and I do have some questions regarding your proposed ordinance. First of all, I do wonder why there are no date limits for the multifamily and cluster residential developments. I'd like to understand that better. Now, should I read them all or one by one here?
I think you should read them all.
Okay. For schools, has there been any consideration for restriction of them being used in proximity of students or teachers? In the current schools, I don't even know if the windows are openable, but if the windows or doors or courtyards are open and people are present, I personally think that leaf blowers ought not be allowed to be used in the presence of people. I mean, students, teachers, or visitors. And I was wondering if there was any discussion about restricting use of gas-powered leaf blowers to clean cigarette butts outside of doorways. Or I have seen leaf blowers being used on streets and walkways with just a few little pieces of debris, and they're chasing those down with the leaf blower. And also, I just do want to comment about the fact that the leaf blowers are not harmless. They're not harmless to the people who come in contact with the noise or the particles that get blown into the air for people to breathe. It's not harmless for the people who use them. Claire Cornish very eloquently stated some of the concerns and some of the scientific evidence that's proven that these are not harmless items. I'm also wondering about when you say define or each and every violation. Like that to be clearer, or I'd like to have a better understanding of that. So if there's an incident where there's 3 backpack blowers and 1 walk-behind blower, is that 1 violation or is that 3? So if for people who read this and who practice it, they may have a clearer understanding of that, but when I read this, it's not clear to me. Also, just for my own curiosity, I'd like to know how, if this is passed, or when this is passed, in whatever form it is, how would one go about reporting this, and to whom would one report? Like, who's responsible for the enforcement? And also, just as a resident, put the GPTF hat aside. I mean, I personally have walked in Field Point, the open space in Field Point, multiple locations, and I've never seen a leaf blower being used in that area. And I've seen evidence of people blowing their leaves onto that open space, neighboring properties, but I've never seen a leaf blower being used in there. And I personally, and this I'm assuming this is an overreach, but I would like it to be encouraged that any large property actually be encouraged to take a vote among their residents as to what type of leaf blowing practices would be appropriate there. Thank you.
Yeah, I had 4 quick ones here. Date limits for multifamily, no. I mean, we decided that we thought it was necessary that they were able to do it, just not on the weekends.
Brian, just as a one aside, remember the request came in, it was specifically about how they are always having to clean off walkways and stuff for resident safety and liability reasons. So that was one of the reasons why they.
What about individual homeowner safety?
So,
restrictions for schools, I actually don't know if we have any jurisdiction over the schools, so I don't think we do. So we can't make the schools, they could have 50 walk-behind blowers, I think, and there's nothing we can do about it. Who to report it to is the police department. That's one we use as to report to. Are there any other? Those are the ones I wrote down. Yeah.
Hi, Anita Sharma. I live at 14 Willow Street, and I've been learning a lot about leaf blowers, and I have to say that I'm very much aligned with Anne and Kathy and a lot of other people in this room who have talked about just how hazardous both to the environment and to individual health and the health of our village as a whole. And the fact that the assertion, I guess, that it's difficult. I think if you look at a number of states and municipalities around the country, they too have grappled with this. There's over 400 towns in California, states of Colorado, Connecticut, Maryland, Massachusetts, Florida, Illinois, New York, Oregon, Arizona either have a full or partial ban. So they've done it, and we can too. I think it's also interesting to note that we're talking about gas-powered leaf blowers. There are alternatives in addition to the rake and the broom. There are electric leaf blowers. I don't know what the exact emissions are and noise levels for them, but perhaps that is. I know, for example, my father has an electric leaf blower and uses that during the proper times. He lives in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. But just a note too, that the type of gas blowers that we're talking about, if there are the bigger ones, the ones that are the leave behind have a 4-stroke engine, which is massive. The back-powered, the ones with the gas, are usually 2-stroke, and a 2-stroke engine is something that was used in motorcycles until they realized that it was too dirty and banned them in motorcycles. And so those engines were then recycled basically and repurposed for the gas blowers. And in the New York Times just earlier in May did a study. They looked at a two-stroke engine and put it alongside of a Ford F-150 Raptor pickup truck. And after a half an hour of yard work, it produced the same amount of hydrocarbon emissions as a 387 mile drive on a truck. So that's nearly 4,000 miles, which is the equivalent almost of us driving to Alaska. So those are the emissions that we're talking about. I know we've heard a lot about health issues as well. I started working from home more recently last month, and I can tell you during the week it is an assault. And I think it's something that neither you nor I or anybody here wants to be subjected to. And leaf blowers, of course, are beloved or reviled for the same reason. They are effective and they're powerful, but I think there are alternatives, and I would ask us to look. Some of the examples that were given were the ones that we should also look at too, and say Yonkers, which does have a gas blower restriction, and Hastings is much more restrictive. So I think we can look at our neighbors and see what we would like to do. And we also can be a leader on this issue for the environment and for the health of all of us. Thanks.
Thanks. This is really interesting. I definitely have not spent a lot of time thinking about this problem, and I'm learning a lot from listening to people. I just had a couple of questions. Oh, sorry. My name's Kathy Kaufman, and I live in Irvington on 28 North Ecker Street. First, I wanted to just, as a philosophical thing, encourage you. I know it's procedurally helpful to develop a comparison, to survey other villages and like villages to come up with a basis so we don't reinvent the wheel for our own policy. But on the other hand, I do think that there's no reason that we have to be slavishly following what other villages are doing. So I really encourage you guys to be independent, and I know you are, and look after the interests of our village, and not feel like ours should be less or more can't be less or more restrictive than other villages, depending upon the community, to reflect the community here. I wanted to just ask a couple of things. One is that I do have an electric leaf vacuum that's really loud, and I use it. It mulches, it sucks up leaves, and it looks like a leaf blower, but it does a reverse thing where it vacuums leaves up and then it mulches them into a bag, and then I can redistribute them around my flower beds. And I thought that was a really cool idea, but I have to just tell everyone it's really loud, and I think it might be as loud as the other gas-powered leaf blowers. On the other hand, it does not have any emissions, and it is much more energy efficient. So from an environmental standpoint, it's probably an improvement. I only use it like 2 days a year, but even then I feel like I'm probably really bothering people, although nobody's ever complained to me about it. That made me think that maybe, in an ideal world, we would be not just banning a particular tool, but we would be banning tools that produce the outcomes we don't like noise or emissions. So for instance, if there's some other gas-powered tools that have similar emissions problems, we would be banning them all at once, or electric-powered tools that do create a lot of noise. I did want to mention that you don't have to use a battery pack to run an electric tool. I have a 50-foot cord and a special device for rolling it back up into my garage, and I use it to mow my lawn. I have an electric lawnmower, and I have this electric leaf vacuum. So I imagine that it's possible to have some massive battery pack on the back of a truck so that you're not using the little mini battery packs for landscapers. And the last thing I wanted to say is I was just curious as to how this would be enforced. Like if there's a violation, who would one call? and especially in terms of the EPA standard, because there's one part of the rule that you specifically requires that we not violate EPA standards, or landscapers don't, and how would it get enforced? And I just wanted to comment that I see a lot of cars idling and buses idling and trucks idling, and I often wonder who would I call about that too. So at the same time, I guess I'm curious as to how that all works.
You call the police is the easy answer for both idling, which is a Westchester County law, and for this, our proposal on this. As far as the EPA regulations, we looked into that, and it would seem fairly simple. It was almost like after this date, you can't buy them. So I think it would have to be very old equipment, which I don't think a lot of landscapers would have, because they don't last that long. But I think it would be, if the police saw like a 1988 leaf blower, they probably think, or they could check if it's. I think the EPA is fairly clear on their website. So I'm guessing it would be a different violation with noise first, but it would be something they could go after if there was a habitual kind of violator or something.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate it.
Hello, my name is Lisa again, and I live at 61 Havemeyer Road, and I want to say first thank you to the board, and I really appreciate all the comments that we've heard, and I'm getting a good education here, and that actually was the reason why I wanted to come up, because I wanted to speak from the perspective of a very ignorant, recent, first-time homeowner and first-time yard haver in my life. Even this was where I grew up, I never had a yard. So the point that I want to make is, in that ignorance, I think my family is not alone in moving, as we happen to, into a property with a big yard, and sort of taking over a contract that our predecessors used with a big company, and seeing things happen to us, and having them unfold very loudly and with a lot of pollution, and sort of not really even having a frame of reference for how we would have a conversation with our landscaper about what practices might be better, because I suspect that if I tried to have that conversation, I would feel quite disempowered and be quite easily cowed with being told that what I was saying was absurd, to use a word I heard here tonight, because how could you possibly, and you just don't understand why you need them in the summer, but we do, because we've been doing this a long time. So to the extent that this ordinance, or something like it, taking into account what others have said, can empower particularly sort of more recent Irvingtonians to start moving down the road to those better practices, which they may not even necessarily know kind of how to get there, and start thinking about this in ways that are not like this manicure that we also heard talked about. Because I also look around at these other pristine properties and think, well, this is what's supposed to happen. So I guess whatever cost is imposed in our community to have that done to our yard is what one does here. And again, I hope that an ordinance like this one can change our framework for what one does do here, so that we're all in it together to think about it in terms of that cost-benefit analysis, and that, a pristine yard is not worth it at any price. I wanted to mention that I had heard about a company that was supposedly more environmentally friendly, and just saw them doing my neighbor's yard with the same gas-powered leaf blowers, making the same amount, the same huge racket, and was again thinking, okay, so am I going to call next? And again, to the extent this ordinance, and I like what Kathy said about thinking it could be sequential, but thinking about other practices and other things that might come down in the future, both in terms of public education campaigns and regulation that might help us tackle the issue in a bigger way, could help me think about what I might do other than call the one guy left who I heard was environmentally friendly. I hope that landscapers too can be more nimble and adjust once we send a signal that this is something we're very serious about. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I had a similar experience when I tried loan and leave them, that my landscaper wouldn't do it for the first couple times, and I said, well, I'll get somebody else, and then they did it.
Yeah.
So, because we have heard anecdotally about people saying, don't blow my leaves every week, I don't need you, I don't care if I have some clippings on my walkway. And usually they're not home. So we've heard from another neighbor, mostly in Squirrel Park, I guess, that even though they went and talked to the neighbor and said, hey, would you mind not blowing every week? And they said, sure.
Yeah.
They just do it because it actually does look better, to that traditional aesthetic. And that's what the New York Times article had a similar quote from a landscaper is, if they let us do our job, it would look a lot better. We can do it without it, but it would look better if they let us do our job. So it's a similar, it definitely is a mind frame.
Yes, yeah, I'd love some help in telling them not to do their job, so help.
Yeah. Anybody else?
MJ Wilson again, and I just have to respond to this idea of doing their job so well, or it would look better, or whatever. In my opinion, many people have come to this idea, we're detached from the natural process. So what it takes to make a lawn look better doesn't necessarily mean the lawn is functioning better. Doesn't mean that your landscaped area is a highly functional, environmentally safe area. Things can look beautiful and they can be hazardous to either the creatures that share this environment with us, or to your neighbor's pets, or to your pets, or to your children. So it's not just about, in my opinion, it's not just about reframing it as to them doing their job well or not. It's like, what job are they doing? And what job is it our priority for them to do? Environmentally sound practices or aesthetically impressive practices? And there are people who are skilled enough that you don't compromise on either one. They can be very aesthetically pleasing and environmentally competent and skilled. And I think some of the practices, the environmental practices about watershed-friendly lawns, love them and leave them, and restriction of leaf blowers and restriction of pesticides, those are all things that can help us move to a more environmentally responsible relationship with this beautiful environment that we live in. Thank you.
I've actually enjoyed watching Jerry Carapiello's lawn grow up. It's been kind of neat.
It's a meadow.
Meadow, exactly. I'm thinking of a meadow concept when we're talking about recreation.
I'm Chet Kerr. I wrote you a letter to avoid you having to say that on the record. I just wanted to say that I support the approach you're taking and the thoughtful way you're doing it. In my letter, I had quoted some local ordinances. I think I said I was quoting Ardsley and Terrytown. I actually quoted Greenberg and Terrytown, and I think the Ardsley one is chapter 137. I hope you looked at them as comparison. They all have different nuances to them, but I just support what you're doing, and I support the thoughtful way you're doing it. Thank you very much.
Chet? Anybody else? Around the outside.
Leola from North Kotzinet Street. Leola Specht. So I don't want to go repeating lots of things that everyone has said, but I'll say one more time that I usually say, that I love that we hear and listen and work together on solutions to things. And so although I'm in the camp of being really, really bothered by the leaf blowers, and I think it's very bad for the workers, very bad, you know, because they don't wear the protection they need to wear, bad for anybody around, bad for the soil, the air, that, you know, the whole thing. And you know, as I returned from a nice weekend away from Memorial, the first thing I heard was this loud leaf blower. I'm like, oh man. And then today, as I went out to work on my computer again, you know, and I think it's exponentially. See, I think the missing part to our proposed law is really this decibel piece, where you have the combination of the lawnmower and the gas-powered leaf blower, and so it compounds the issue and makes, you know, this sound problem, and it goes on and on and on. It was an hour as I'm trying to sit on my porch peacefully working on my laptop, and it just lasts, you know, way too long. It's just the mockingbirds sang so beautifully once they were done. And that's the kind of thing that I think we should enjoy in Irvington, our quality of life, the quiet that we really would like to restore. And not without thought to our landscapers. Of course we want our landscapers to have viable businesses. That's, of course, as important, but we need to partner together on a better way. We can do better. This is bad for the workers, for the residents, for everybody. So education, again, about what it means to really have a truly thriving lawn and landscape, and, you know, let go of some of this one leaf thing in the way. The landscapers may perceive that a homeowner wants it all perfect like that, but perhaps that's not really the case. And so anyway, let's partner together to do better, and I so much appreciate this proposal that's on to limit the leaf blowers and add decibels. Reduce decibels. We can't have any more than 55 decibels May 1st to October 1st and 75 any other time or something like that. I think the decibels is really what we need to add to this. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Leaf blowers? He's bored like a shot. I'm kidding. I guess the joke, I looked away, I looked at Mark. Yes, I will, that's true, thank you, Dennis. First from Alan Richardson. It's my understanding that there are certain exemptions, I'll paraphrase most of these. It is my understanding there are certain exemptions for golf courses, townhome-type complexes, and properties over half acre. But golf courses and townhome complexes will be required to limit the use of leaf blowers to 100 feet from an adjacent residence. I do not understand why you aren't requiring the same 100-foot buffer for use on parcels over a half acre. An example of why this is needed is the large estate property at the end of North Dutcher. The houses bordering the property are only 3 feet away from the property line. The landscapers for the property use multiple gas blowers 3 feet outside the windows of our home several times a week. We have to shut the house tight just to breathe. There should be a 100-foot buffer from any neighboring residence for use of gas blowers and parcels over 100 half acre too. I also think you should bump that up to 1 acre. Half acre is just too small. I also think fall usage should be limited to October 15th to December 25th. 3 months is unnecessary and too long. And that was Alan Richardson.
And we'll go back to clarifying the issue of the 100 feet and where it applies and when it applies. I just want to keep that thought.
Sure. The next is from Claudia and Frank Gasparini. They've lived in Irvington for 23 years. During this period, they have personally maintained the lawn, landscaping, pruning, and seasonal annual plantings. We thoroughly enjoy this work and constantly receive compliments from neighbors and individuals walking by. The first year we worked on the lawn maintenance, we did not have a leaf blower. We soon realized how essential this tool was, given the half-acre size of our property and the number of trees on our property. We have owned and used a leaf blower now for 22 years. Normally when we use the leaf blower, it's only for a period of 15 to 20 minutes, and it's never before 10 a.m. and certainly not after 6 p.m. So they strongly oppose the ban of leaf blowers between May 15th and September 15th. If a ban has to be enacted, I have proposed a compromise on the dates and institute the ban from June 1 to September 1. Trees are still shedding buds, etc. throughout May, and leaves start drying up and dropping in early September. In addition, an option would be to include this time frame to permit the use of leaf blowers on a designated weekday and a designated weekend day. Lastly, in 2015, I purchased a new Stihl VR 500 blower, which is designed to operate at a low emissions and low noise. I did this for the benefit of myself and my neighbors. I believe that a low emission, low noise blower should be exempt from any ban. That was Frank Gasparini. The next is from Richard Turk, president of River House Condominiums. One of my primary concerns is to keep the property clean, safe, and free of debris from trees and leaves. Again, that's the River House Condominiums, which are down here. As the property is a corner of Buckout Bridge and Astor Streets and abuts the beautiful trees surrounding Matheson Park, we are constantly reminding the owners to keep their decks and drains free of leaves and other debris. We also have 2 large flat roofs, and we have to use a blower to keep the drain system clear. We cannot hand sweep as the rubber flooring have joints that require blowing. We are also required to maintain the sidewalks that border our property. We use the blower to clear these areas quickly, especially after it rains. The wet leaves are impossible to sweep by hand. Therefore, we request an exemption to allow the use of the leaf blower for 20 minutes per week and after it rains. Next is from Eleanor Alcorn. I support limiting the use of gas leaf blowers in Irvington. Pretty much it. This is from Diana Nacello Kozalewski. I fully support the ban. My son has severe allergies and asthma, and they wreak havoc on him. I work from home, and the noise in the summer is worse than when I lived in Hell's Kitchen. Greg and Denise O'Connor from Woodbrook Gardens Cooperative. Leaf blowers are noisy, pollution-causing, detrimental to health, and a constant irritant. Fortunately, we live in a small multifamily complex governed by a cooperative board that has been entrenched for years. They rarely enforce bylaws and house rules. Almost every day the blowers are used. Since we're now retired, we witness how one worker will use the unit to move around a single leaf, a spot of dirt, or nothing at all around the property. Gas fumes fill the common area and reach up to our apartment. Unnecessary tasks repeated on most days of the week. I think that was all I had. So now, Janice, would you like to start? Since you always start with Mark.
Particularly.
No? Mark, would you like to start?
Just 2 things. One, procedural. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 suggestions that from speakers or from letters.
Yes.
Should we consider those or what?
Yeah, I mean,
I'm thinking that carrying this over so we can consider
absolutely.
them is what I'm
I
suggesting.
mean, where I think we are right now in the process, which is why it's not necessary for all of us to speak tonight. I think we heard a lot of information on both sides of the issue, and I think we can make a much better law from input we've heard tonight. Really glad people showed up. I'm glad people that couldn't attend sent us letters. It seems that no matter how much publicity we always try to put on issues, no one ever pays attention until it's almost being passed. So I think that there's enough information for us to digest, discuss, and work through that. I definitely don't intend on voting tonight. So I think there's enough that we probably will need a whole work session to come, to discuss it as a board, and then come back to another public hearing is my recommendation. So I don't know if you want to keep talking tonight, or...
I just had one thought that I wanted to share, and probably it's not that politic, but my problem is, I have a property, lots of trees, and I know that even now, this time of year, after a heavy rainstorm, my driveway, my patio, my walkways, everything are covered with wet debris, and it's definitely a difficulty in cleaning up. That said, I think that the overriding factor to me is the public health issues, issues with the impacts of particulate matter on development of lungs, kids getting asthma from exposure to too much particulate matter, and then obviously the noise issues. So I think there's an overriding public health concern. And the other thing I wanted to say, and this is going to sound a little scolding, but it's not like this is a surprise, folks. I mean, we're one of the last communities in Westchester probably that does not have a ban in place. So this has been coming. So all these people that are talking about, or the folks, especially the landscapers, who act surprised about it being too draconian. It's not draconian. We've been adding exceptions as people have come forward, saying we can't do our job properly. So we've been weakening the the window of limitation to fit specific well-voiced requests for exemptions. My point is that a lot of this has to do with the culture of use by the crews. And I think that if people, the owners of the businesses, set the crews aside and talked about what is good practice and what is not good practice, we'd have a lot better situation in this community. So the problem I see, for instance, we've heard it before, but when you have 3 blowers running and they're just walking around from property to property, they're not even using them, or they have them set down on the ground and are mowing the lawn. Or the thing I see all the time on Harriman and South Broadway is they're blowing everything out into the middle of the street and creating traffic hazards before they then round them back up again. And for some reason, it has to be in the middle of the street first before they can actually round them up. I don't know what the logic is there. So there's a lot of stuff that I would call, it's what used to be called common courtesy. So I feel like that's lacking in the training of the work crews. The idea that you need to use a blower to just blow one leaf up and down a driveway for 20 minutes just because you have to look like you're doing something, or the thing I get on my driveway all the time is they blow the, it's nice, they blow the common driveway, but everything ends up blowing down my driveway. So it's all packed up behind my car and I have to go and clean it up afterwards. So there's a courtesy issue here. And I guess that's it. I think it's really, it's time for the landscape company owners to pull their crews aside and set some real guidelines. It isn't just, we do it this way because that's how we've always done it. It's not that anymore. This is a start, and I can see that it's going to become much more draconian if we continue to get complaints from the neighborhoods. So, hopefully, that's my opinion.
That was definitely scolding.
I don't know how to say it politely, right? Usually you try to say things politely, but sometimes it just has to be said, like, on the face of it.
Fair enough.
Well, really, just echoing what Mark said, perhaps not in such a scolding way. As we're trying to do with our traffic calming committee, a behavior change, a change where people are more appreciative of their neighbors, a change where people are aware of what, as Mark said, common courtesy means. And I think Mark had spoken about actually handing out cards. That's sort of.
You want me to describe that for a second?
You're welcome.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I was been proposing that we create a handout card. We love handout cards. One side is the new regulations written for ease for a homeowner to actually understand them, very succinct, not legalese. And the other side being just some rules of courtesy, what to do and what not to do with a blower, and, including a lot of things people have talked about. So, anyways.
You want it to be all caps too, right?
No, actually, that's, I think, said something about, don't blow it, that was the cap. But anyways, and I would really love people to contact me to get a copy of it, of the courtesy guidelines. I'd love any kind of input on it, because these I've gathered, talking to a few landscapers, but I'd love to get more feedback so we can have something that everyone agrees to. I'm sorry, Larry.
That's quite all right. I'll cede the floor.
Jumping over you, Brian. I'm interested in, and we have discussed this in a work session, the issue of measuring decibels. The discussion we had in that work session had to do with how easy or reliable are the measuring devices, and how would our police do this? Or how would you call and say the decibel level is this? I think it's something we should explore and think about. I'm not sure what the answer is, but I think it's an idea that I heard a couple of times, and I think it's worth continuing the discussion. On the issue of the schools, which we have no impact on, I certainly glad that issue was brought up. And obviously that's a discussion to have with the school district, and I'm sure someone could do that. I'm always interested in unintended consequences and what you might do to think you're making something better, and maybe you're doing something to make it worse. I think we've thought through all those, but the issue of the time before the band starts, how do we make sure that the time spent, in this time that it isn't a ban, isn't longer because of what we're talking about? We're not banning anything, but we have, I don't know what kind of thing we deal with at that pre-ban time, but that time concerns me. I don't know what the answer is, but it's something I'm going to keep wondering about.
You mean
Before the ban,
after we pass it?
Yeah, well, no, I'm talking about the time period before May 16th, like the earlier time when there is no ban.
Right, okay.
What happens then? In what way are if there are multiple blowers in a shorter time? We haven't said anything about the pre-time. Maybe we won't. Maybe that's something to be dealt with.
No, the other limitations hold.
Yeah, there is no limitation.
No, they all are.
Yeah.
They all hold, except limitations only apply when you can use them. I mean, I think you might be thinking.
Can't use them except for 2 months here and 2 months there.
Right.
And then when you use them, these are the limitations.
Right, but I'm,
yeah. You can't use them. You can't do it.
Right, you can't use them.
She's asking.
Yeah, right, it just, there's the one, okay. And obviously the issue of batteries, that's something that interests me. Let's say it again.
No, a couple of people said what you were asking for is about the time when you can use it, and when you can use it, it says you can only use them from 9 to 5 and different, and whatever on Saturday, Sunday.
Right, but the issue of using one or many, if you can only use one, are you extending the time that it's going to happen? And does that...
What Pat Contuno said
right,
about...
right. So that's the issue I'm talking about. Is that an unintended consequence that we're creating that might be a worse problem than what we're solving? I also, I'm thinking about the individual homeowner with the 20 minutes, I do this one-on-one with the best possible equipment. How can that be incorporated, that's something I would be willing to think about as something that maybe shouldn't be forbidden. A short time by, not a company, but by an individual, maybe. And all that. And then there was also the issue, and maybe there's some clarification here brought to mind when Alan's letter. If you are near a much bigger property and you abut a very large property, can you be protected against what's allowed on large properties? Because it's just as much a problem, even though you're close, but you could be very close to a large property. That could be a problem. And then overall, the whole issue of how do we, I think this is where Mark's example of how in the past, we've tried to do a long educational effort. And we worked on what does it meant when we do mulching. So that education effort is something I think needs to go hand in hand with this kind of regulation. Anyway, that's it.
Well, it was wonderful how many people came out and spoke tonight and how clearly you presented your concerns and issues. I am glad that there was one contractor here because I do think it's important to understand that the kind of use the term unintended consequences, but we want to make sure we're doing this in a way that doesn't cause other harms or other problems. And also, this is not one of those things that is going to be perfectly resolved to everybody's satisfaction. We're not going to come out of here with a law that bans the use of leaf blowers altogether any day of the year for any point, not now. But we need to start somewhere. We're hearing loud and clear what the concerns are, and I think we decide what the priorities are, and the priority I'm hearing is health. Health and the just noise of salt, that this has become an unsurmountable burden for this community. I think, however, we have to regroup, go have a work session. I like the idea of inviting some more contractors to participate in this. And also one change, just based on what we've heard here, that I would support is individual homeowners, and it was a model somebody said from one of the other communities, is not applying to individual homeowners who use their own equipment on their own property.
I think the libertarian side of me is always, reticent to kind of over-regulate everything. But I do think that there's enough kind of bad behavior that is, it's getting worse every year. And I think a lot of it is, I like Mark's culture of use, because that's really what it is to me. And I see it on even my own property with my own landscapers. They want it to look a certain way because we all kind of want it to look that way because we saw it on the Brady Bunch or something. And that's what they do. And I think slowly over time that's slowly changing. I have a lot of dandelions on my lawn because we don't use fertilizer or anything like that, or any kind of weed killers. We've kind of gotten used to it. I just sell a bunch of wild strawberries in my backyard, but it's okay. It's kind of a lawn. It's green with a little red. But I do think that if we all could have just kind of policed ourselves, we wouldn't have to do this. But I think we're at a point now where we're kind of way past the tipping point with the way kind of the average, landscaper is treating lawns. So I think that we do need to do something. I think it was great that Pat Contuno came in to get that perspective. I'll take him up on his offer to sit down with him. Maybe we'll invite him and a couple others that want to come to a work session, because we've definitely heard from the other side that's being annoyed by them. But we want to understand those unintended consequences. I do also kind of have a soft spot for the person that goes out and blows off their deck once a week for 10 minutes. I don't think that that's who we're really intending, because they don't have a lot of emissions, they don't have a lot of noise, they just want to get their patio cleaned up before people are coming over. So I think that we can work on those little tweaks, and then as Shanna said, even after we work on it, if we worked on it for the next 10 years, it wouldn't be perfect. When we kind of get it out there, we get as close as possible, we can always amend it. That's the great thing about a law. So, that'll be the final word on...
Well, I have one other educational thing.
Please.
Just,
no, correct.
No, this is just for...
My hubris.
For humor's sake, the current decibel level of this last conversation has been between 58 and 71 decibels. This whole conversation got my meter was picking up noisy as Brian started to talk because he was closer to it. So that just gives you a sense of the ambient
When you were
sound.
scolding, that was like 85.
I'm sure it was. The ambient sound typically is between 60 and 65, like in a room like this. So that's what we're talking about as a potentially regulated.
It's not linear.
It's a logarithmic scale.
I understand that totally. I'm not.
Not everyone. 85 is a lot louder than 65.
I understand that. I'm just saying that this is 65 in the room.
Can you give us 85?
Give us an 85.
Maybe during the historic district.
Actually, laughter doesn't.
So I will, do I have to make a motion to continue it, or just stays open? It just continues without me, okay. So I will make a motion to have a second public hearing tonight, to consider a local law amending chapter 224 zoning, and 9, Board of Architecture review, to implement the Irvington Historic District Design Guide and recommendations. Can I have a second?
Second.
All in favor? It's now open. We'll see who doesn't live in a historic district and just wanted to blow their leaves. I'm very impressed Jimmy's still here. I have a doubt. Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for sitting here.
Thank you.
That's great.
Here we are again.
Closing my blinds now. Yeah, exactly. They're not bad. They're a little not quite right yet. Thank you.
It's all downhill. So Larry,
There are
you want
some people who I think in the community would like that tool too, so let's coordinate that.
Well, I think I could make them be a little bit more sensitive. Yeah, okay, right. You probably got some that I didn't.
Take care, Jimmy. Thanks very much.
Research that I want to know.
Yes. Brenda, do you have any more water? I don't want to make it, whether it's any bad thing. I would fill it with tap water. Oh, okay.
Yeah, water. Yeah, I need more.
Oh, there's more back there? Oh, okay.
Perfect, never mind. Okay, so our second public hearing is open. Mary Ann, did you want to lead off?
Although technically the public hearing isn't on the design guide and recommendations, because the board can adopt those without a public hearing. But they're central to the local law, which would amend two parts of the village code. The first change would be to the zoning code. There's a chapter of the code called the Historic Overlay District, and in that section, there's a specification that in addition to any other requirements of the code, any construction, reconstruction, alteration, repair, or expansion of any building in the historic overlay district have to be approved by the Board of Architectural Review. The requirement doesn't apply to repairs that don't affect the exterior of a building, nor to repairs or replacement in kind. And in kind means that the materials and appearance are exactly whatever's replacing it is exactly the same. All right, so that's the change to the zoning code. Then the other changes are to the Board of Architectural Review chapter of the code. actually, there's one other change in the zoning code, and it says that appeals from the ARB on anything relating to historic district buildings is made to the Board of Trustees rather than to the zoning board. That's in that section. It's also in the ARB chapter. Okay. Then the ARB chapter, right now, on the there's a provision relating to demolition of buildings in the historic overlay district. That doesn't change, but it's now applies not only to demolition, it's just to other alterations or repairs. So it's called now it's just called the historic overlay district. And there's two paragraphs in there. One relating to, and they both really say the same thing. One is for contributing buildings, one's for non-contributing buildings. It says, in reviewing any application to reconstruct, alter, repair, or expand a contributing building in the historic overlay district, the applicant and the Board of Architectural Review shall be guided by the Irvington Historic District Design Guide and Recommendations. And then there's the same provision for any new construction and non-contributing buildings, because it's different provisions in the guide for non-contributing buildings. Not so much for the building, but for how it relates to the neighboring buildings. And contributing buildings is defined in the code. There's actually a list of contributing buildings. And then, yes. There's two main changes. That's one, and then the other one is, which I referred to before, is that appeals from, any person aggrieved by the disapproval of an application for a building in the historic overlay district would appeal to the Board of Trustees rather than the zoning board.
Very good. So if anyone's decided to see us vote one way or the other tonight, I think you're going to be disappointed. Similar to the leaf blower law, there's a lot of work's gone into this. The Historic District Committee has done an unbelievable job. If you haven't read the design guide yet, you can actually read it as a book, put it on your coffee table and flip through it. To me, it has a great history of Irvington. It has lots of pictures, which I enjoyed. It gives you a little cram course in architecture, the type of architecture found in the village. It gives great examples of, recommended and non-recommended ways to redo a house, from windows to doors to siding to additions, whatever it is. It's truly a great document. I'm unbelievably impressed. I don't know what I expected, but it way exceeded anything I expected, and you should all be really proud of that work, and the Tilly group people as well did an unbelievable job. But it truly is a great standalone document, whether or not anything ever goes forward. That document is fantastic. Other than that, I think tonight really we want to hear, again, like the leaf blower law, what all of you that are still here want to say to us. We only received really a limited amount of correspondence before tonight. We've been meeting. When do we start the Historic District Committee piece?
20 of us.
Yeah, it's been a long time. And then this particular piece of it has been going on for at least a year, maybe 2 years. 2 years, and we must have had 10 meetings between work sessions and public meetings, public work sessions and public meetings. It has to be at least 10. We'll say a dozen. It sounds much more efficient. No one ever argues if you say a dozen. But it's been, for me, it's been very educational on many levels. But I have been shocked by the lack of public input we've received so far. So I'm glad to see there's a healthy group here tonight. Maybe we should have done the leaf blower second. Maybe there's a little more passion for that. But that's where basically tonight we want to hear from you, and then we'll probably chime in at the end again. We'll let Mark go last and scold everyone again. But who would like to lead off? First of all, would anyone from the committee like to say something? I know you gave us a nice intro letter.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask about.
Sure.
Was whether you want the letter read into the record tonight. We don't have to do that first, but it was a question that we had, whether you want to do that or not.
I mean, I don't know if we need to read the entire thing. Do you want to read some highlights from it, maybe? Looks like you have a highlighter on it. Oh. Or does John want to do it? John looks like he's ready.
And thanks to the board for creating first of all, the opportunity to put this, make this available to the community, including the historic district itself. And it is intended to be inclusive, and we would like to hear comments from historic owners of properties in the historic district and from the Board of Trustees. And it's a community effort, really, to help implement some measure of protection for the historic character of the historic district. You're welcome to read the letter into the record, Mr. Mayor, if you like. We're prepared to do it either way.
What Earl is referring to is, are there copies in the back to that part of the backup? No. It is online, and what it is a letter from the Historic District Committee and all those members explaining what their intention was, how they put this together, and then have frequently asked questions and answers about the effects, and possibly the part that is less known or people are less aware of, which I think should come out as we discuss this, is what the current practice is in what the ARB does and what was changed several years ago, and how that would compare to what this current situation is. So you have to know what currently is being done to compare it to what's being proposed. So I hope that comes out in the discussion.
I'll make a motion to have a letter be in the official record, so that, but I can give some highlights. I think the FAQs, I think would probably be the most relevant part to read. So I'll read some of that now. Who will use the design guide? It is intended as a resource for property owners, design professionals, builders, realtors, the Architectural Review Board, anyone planning renovations, exterior alterations, or new construction in the Irvington Historic District. It will be widely publicized for the public in print versions and on the village website and referenced in the village code. How is the Historic District Design Guide intended to be used? It is a starting point in identifying the design, style, materials, and historic features of the various structures in the historic district. Both the 274 contributing and 44 non-contributing structures, so that any exterior repairs, alterations, can be designed, built, and maintained in a manner that is harmonious and compatible with the historic character of the neighborhood. It's a document for use by the ARB in reviewing applications for alterations to exterior appearances of properties in the historic district. Will anything change for property owners in the historic district by the adoption of the design guide and the accompanying legislation? Yes and no. Currently, the ARB evaluates all applications for building permits for structure anywhere in the village on the basis, quote, on the basis of compatibility and harmony with neighboring structures and properties, as well as the applicant's impact on the historic character in the neighborhood and village, end quote. The ARB has been charged since 2015, when the village code was amended, to, quote, protect the historic character of the village, in particular in the Irvington Historic District, which as January 14th is listed on the National Register of Historic Places, end quote. The new draft proposed legislation states that for applications for a building permit, quote, in the historic overlay district, the applicant ARB shall be guided by, end quote, the HD Design Guide. The HD Design Guide itself states the ARB shall be guided by the HD Design Guide to inform its decisions as to maintaining the historic character of the building, structure, and/or property. Thus, all property owners in the historic district will continue to appear before the ARB for a building permit and are not required to appear before an additional historic district design review board. However, the ARB will review the application while using and referring to the HD Design Guide, while the ARB will not use the HD Design Guide while reviewing structures outside the HD. The language of the HD Design Guide, however, is purposely in the form of recommendations, that's in bold, and ARB members will still respond to unique features of each application. In addition, the new draft legislation also changes the appeal process for application denied by the ARB, rather than appealing to the Zoning Board of Appeals, as currently provided, appeal to the Board of Trustees. Will the Historic District Design Guide and legislation create any burdens for property owners in the Historic District? No. The HDC has kept this question in mind throughout our work. As explained above in number 3, the historic character is already considered by the ARB when reviewing an application. Historic District Design Guide has been developed with the goal of making the ARB criteria more transparent so that the process can be more understandable and efficient. The HT Design Guide also expressly recognizes and acknowledges that costs are an important component when property owners select materials for exterior renovations. The ARB shall take into consideration costs associated with implementing recommendations in the HT Design Guide. Last part's a quote. As the current land use regulations require, all property owners in and outside of the historic district will continue to appear before the ARB for a building permit. There is no other extra additional historic district architecture or design review board to appeal before. No ARB approval is needed for purely cosmetic work such as painting, floor refinishing, changing door hardware, or for landscaping not involving retaining walls. That does not change. In addition, repairs in kind in the historic district do not require ARB approval. This is essentially the same as in section 95.4 of the village building code, which applies to the entire village. Therefore, the proposed new law will not require additional review of any repair in the village. Lastly, the new proposed appeals process does not add an additional burden to the HD applicant either. The new process provides that the Board of Trustees, rather than the ZBA, will hear an appeal from the ARB relating to the property within the historic district. Thus, any person aggrieved by the ARB's approval application shall serve a written notice to the village clerk within 30 days, and the BOT will make a final decision as to whether to reverse, affirm, or remand the ARB's decision. And then there's some debunking myths and misconceptions. The HD Design Guide does not dictate paint colors or hardware, and it does not prohibit certain types of windows, doors, roofs, or siding. The HD Design Guide makes recommendations. You can still replace materials in your house with something other than that made of wood or costly materials. The HD Design Guide does not discourage creativity improvements to properties. It is false to suggest that because of the HD Design Guide, owners of designated historic structures may not make changes to their structures. Historic preservation laws, at their essence, are not meant to prevent change and are certainly not about squeezing out creativity and exciting new architecture development. Recommendations in the HD Design Guide are not restrictions and do not prohibit repairs, renovations, and additions. It is not true that the HD Design Guide prohibits additions to the front and side of historic structures in the historical district. The Historical District Design Guide recommends that additions be in scale with the original structure and do not result in the loss of overall architectural character. All additions, including side and front, are evaluated by the ARB under the same set of standards for all their homes seeking the same approval. Number 5, it is not true that the length of time will necessarily increase for the approval process. In fact, the expectation is that because applicants from the earliest stage of the design process and the ARB both reference the same HD Design Guide, discussion and review time with the ARB may be lessened. And that's it. I think I'm done talking to the next. More water.
Want some water?
Enough water.
Martini.
Okay. So there's the kickoff. Kind of sucked all the life out of the room. But, who would like to re-energize the room? Ken Bernstein, perfect. I would recommend you.
You don't have to read his letter.
I'll take any Bernstein. Yeah, I don't have to read your letter now. That's perfect.
Well, that's why I stood up. I didn't want you to have to read my letter.
I
Tony
appreciate
Bernstein, 10 North Ecker Street. My wife Deborah and I submitted a letter. It has a fair amount of detail in it, I think, more than I plan on presenting now. I'd love you to just consider the detail in that letter as well. We own a home in the historic district. I agree, Brian, with your introduction. I think this document is a great document. I might put it on my coffee table. It's really interesting. It's informative. If I were to do some kind of renovation on my house, I would definitely consult it, and I would give it very careful consideration. I would encourage that this document be distributed to everyone in the historic district. I would encourage that anyone applying for a building permit be given a copy of this document. I think it's great, but I am very concerned about codifying this document, and in particular, I know the way the proposed law is, the language is that the applicant and the ARB shall be guided by this document in making decisions about anything relating to the exterior of a home. And I know, it can be difficult to get approvals as it is, and even though the guide refers to things as being, it's recommendations. My concern is that the ARB, current members or 10 years from now, have a 50-page document with lots of great detail that would be a very easy document to just open up. If someone's making a certain kind of change, go to that page and use it as a checklist and say, oh, well, you should follow this recommendation, you should follow that, and you're not, and denied, or what have you. So I don't know the exact answer. I recognize the problems the building department, the board faces, and the ARB in particular faces, but I am very concerned that this becomes more of a mandate than a recommendation document. So I would also just note the other kind of issue I had, which is in the letter, is that I was concerned, despite the what I've been told and what in the FAQ you just read, that there's nothing that's more required for approval than there was previously. I think the language, as it's now written, may require more approvals than prior, and in particular with respect to repairs. I don't think there was a reference in the current code, although I'm not expert on that code, to needing approvals for repairs other than certain major structural repairs. And I think the way the language is written now in this proposed law, that repairs, except if there's an exact match of materials and appearance, might in fact need an approval, and I would hope that that could be lessened in some way. Thank you.
Thank you. So many highlights I had. It would have taken me a lot longer to read that. You did a better job anyway. You brought the life back. Who's next? Mr. Riley.
I'm exhausted. Bob Riley. First of all, I'd like to comment on the guidelines, and that's really a wonderful history lesson. The problem is exactly what happens when it gets into the hands of the architecture group. Now, I also want to start by saying they're very good on the Architecture Review Board. They have qualified people who can comment, but it's a very slippery slope from the concept of preserving our historic district to what is it. I will tell you, if anybody thinks the cost is the same, it's not. Even the cost of doing the details that are part of what they would want is definitely not the same. There are some new examples out now of concepts of new versus existing, that the new should be totally different than the existing. Now, could you imagine on projects that we're working on that here's an existing house and we put a glass cube next to it? I think, the village just wouldn't stand for it. So I don't think there is a clear path that the architect or the ARB has the standards to know what to do with an applicant. Every job is going to be different. I went up and down Main Street today and I looked to see what potential sites are there for demolition. There are not a lot. Start on there's like three major areas. There's the Upper Main Street, there's the school district, then there's the shopping district, and then the railroad area. The upper one, when you look at it, there's my client's building. They're all very well established. They're all very close together. I mean, I don't think anybody's going to come in. I know we've had the problem of the yellow building and the train station, and I realize we had a demolition concern, which if we lost the yellow house, it would be terrible. So we obviously have a law that took care of that. I think he got talked out of it, but I'm not sure the way to resolve giving the village more time, how that's going to work when there really is a problem, when somebody is coming in with maintenance or not. But there is not a lot of space on Main Street to concern you with this tremendous law about demolition. I mean, look, the 130, we ended up being tailgated onto the demolition law, and then there still isn't a good example of how the Architecture Review Board is going to be able to grapple with the variations that are going to come up with the village. Look at the side streets. 90% of all of the side streets, I don't mean are legal, but they're not code compliant. So how, when somebody makes to make an addition, what are they going to get involved in? You know, what procedure do they have to go through? I mean, the side streets got to be at least 60 or 70% of all the buildings in the historic district. I mean, I think the idea of historic preservation is absolutely correct. I think to prohibit demolition or to try and stop it is exactly the right thing to do. But I don't want the cure to be worse than the bite. And I think there's a lot of temptation that wonderful ideas, when you have to get through the process of implementing, that's a whole nother story. And I'd like you not to vote on it as quick, because I think I have I hope a good suggestion for the Architecture Review Board. There should be more work sessions. See, the problem is, it's new, this whole sort of in-depth analysis. In the old days, you went to the planning board, you went to the building department, you went to get a building permit, and you went to the ARB at the end. You're at the 11th hour. You were ready to start digging, and tomorrow, and the Architecture Review Board was really just, why don't you change a window or so? Well, this is completely different. And in fact, I could see conflict between the planning board and the ARB. I mean, now the planning board is really just sort of, do they fit all the requirements of zoning? I would say in the historic district, the Architecture Review Board are the designers of the house. Now, I know it's, especially if the guidelines, and they're wonderful, but if they become law, that's a whole nother problem. So I'd like it to be a tool for the public to have, but I'm worried about when all of a sudden it becomes a regulation, and there might be more to what is a good resolution of a historic building than we thought about now, and that's really what we should be thinking about. What is an appropriate solution to a house? And I would like to be able, if you people could have us, I'd like to come in and run through the process, because we're what's the paper child? What's the term? We're the first ones to come in on a major renovation. And I think the Architecture Review Board has been very fair and helpful, but it's a slow and hard process. So I'd like to bring you guys up to date, if that's okay with you, at a work session, to give you, some idea of what took place and how I think I'm not sure it can be shortcutted. I think the problem of everybody getting their hands into a construction project in the historic district is something we really don't know anything about. Everybody thinks of the historic district should be saved, but how do you do it is a whole nother story. That's it. I think a lot of the people that I've talked to, and I have some people that signed petitions to, I think they're worried about the cost. I think they're worried about whether the regulations are going to get more involved. I think they see this. There's been some discussion of the earlier stages of the historic district, that it told them that there would be no dramatic regulations. That's not correct. We do have very clear regs that are coming out, and they're probably going to get more. So that's it.
All right, thank you.
You're up.
I just have Wheeler on North Cottonwood Street. I just have a sort of a quick ask on all this. I love that there are guidelines too, and love that we want to preserve the historic character of our village. I live in a historic home. But, and this is maybe a piggyback to the last comment that we said, it's the sort of practical application of how do you get stuff done at a reasonably affordable, rate. For example, my basement door was this wooden one, and it was literally all falling apart, but I was like, that's kind of a nice looking door, but it was just unusable. And I went to contractors in the area. I said, who's good at, old homes? And all of them said, oh, just go to Home Depot. You can do this. I don't have a lot of money. What do you do? Go to Home Depot and get this vinyl door. A whole bunch of them said that. Until finally, a carpenter in town said, well, I could restore that for you, actually, because it was a no-brainer for all the contractors in the area. Oh, yeah, I'll replace that. Well, we can even get a cheap one at Home Depot. Well, so what I ask as a homeowner is we need sort of, education about who can do the work for us and how do we get it done. Every time I've had a renovation need, something broke, whatever, there's nobody that I could find that could do it, or at least not in my price range. And even restoring that door was more than 3 times the price of the Home Depot door. And so, gosh, it'd be really awesome if we could have some way to make this doable for homeowners. Thanks.
Right up front. You're not as tall as MJ.
I know, really. Pat Ryan, 10 South Dutcher Street. Actually, I've a couple of thoughts on this. One that is actually an issue that I bring up time and time again and have for years. And Bob alluded a little bit to it. And that is that it is so difficult and so complicated for homeowners in the historic district to go through the process in terms of making any sort of changes in their homes, even interior changes, because all of our homes are already non-compliant, and that automatically triggers going to the zoning board. This is something that I think has been talked about for years. Really, I don't believe has been addressed. And I think it's basically unfair to the homeowners in the district. I think also that it sets people up to be fearful of any new regulations that they see coming. I believe that these changes to the code should have been looked at and changed years ago. They have not been. But I also think that it really predisposes people in the district to be incredibly cautious and fearful about any new regulations. So that aside, which really has nothing to do with tonight's issue, I think that the guide is an incredible document. Obviously, everybody feels that way. One of the things that I think it does mention is that there are very few architecturally pure structures in the historic district. There are types. There's a Queen Anne style. There's a, Gothic style. But there is no assumption in that document that we are dealing with pure styles. I think the document is really written as a guide. And I think that as a guide, it's incredibly helpful for homeowners. I understand that people are fearful of the idea of a slippery slope. And I live in the district, and I understand that fear. However, I think that the slippery slope already exists. If you look at the charge of the ARB, it is very clear what their responsibility is. And it's to protect the historic character of the village. And it is to determine whether a certain change in a structure is compatible and harmonious with neighboring structures, as well as the impact on the historic character. That's already in there. The guide merely lets people know what that means. It says to you, here's what these terms mean. Here's information on how you can look at your project, how you can make it more in line with your neighborhood, with your street. But those charges are already there. This does not really change. I think one of the problems in the past has been that people say, well, these decisions are arbitrary. What does it mean? The purpose of the guide is to say, oh, here's what it means. And I think in that way, it's really a helpful resource for the homeowner. I do think it should be distributed widely. People should have it early on. There should be even ways that the village publicizes the fact that it exists, that it's on the website, that it's available. But I think that saying we shouldn't adopt this or we shouldn't have this is really going back to something that is even more vague and even more arbitrary. We don't know who's going to be on the ARB in 5 years. Perhaps they will interpret that phrase differently. Perhaps they'll interpret that charge very strictly. And there is nothing that really prevents that. At least this gives us all some idea as to, what the guidelines are. And I think that's only helpful. Now, I do know that people have talked about concerns about the linking legislation, and perhaps that is something that should be looked at more carefully. I believe we need some sort of linking legislation, but if there's a way that that can be more clearly defined, something that's gives more reassurance to homeowners, then I think that's something that we should look at. But in all, I think that this document is really more of a help than a hindrance. So, thank you.
I will say that the issue you brought up about almost every house being non-conforming is something we're all very aware of.
On the list.
And it is on the list as the next thing to tackle. So that impediment will be hopefully removed in the next 7 years. And sit on the inside when you can speak, right?
I'm Kathy Kaufman, 28 North Ecker. I just wanted to say apropos of this issue of whether this is, how distinct this is from the past. As I have to agree with what Pat said, and I also feel a little bit exposed because I sat up on the panel in 2011 as a member of the Historic District Committee and told people that we felt that this would not be, and it create an additional burden, and that it was not any more strict in terms of as a regulation than what they'd experienced in the past. And I just want to say that I hate to to feel like we're going to make a liar out of me at some point, because I really felt that, and I still do. And I just wanted to remind people that when we renovated our house just the year before that, in like 2010 or something, we in fact did go through the ARB process, and I had Andy Lyons say that he didn't like my dormers. And I love Andy Lyons, and he's got great taste, and so I ended up putting in much more expensive dormers. and had to make a lot of trade-offs as a result. But those things did happen, and to Pat's point, we've always been, subject to the, the reactions and concerns about harmony in the neighborhood and fitting in with the neighboring properties, as we will be in the future, and the interpretation will change according to how strictly each individual member of the ARB adheres to guidelines or their own personal aesthetic preferences. But I do agree that by making this more transparent and more explicit, at least we, as a community, have some input, because we do have input into this document, and it can be a living and organic document, into what we think is an important consideration that should guide the review process. And in the past, it really was just a black box. So I really think that we're not adding any new restrictions. We're just really making it more transparent, and that's got to be helpful for people. At least it enables us to have a conversation about what it is people are considering and what's important. Thanks.
Who's next? Sat so patiently that I'm going to speak. We wore everybody down, or no?
Yes.
Should have had a third hearing tonight. Really, nobody else?
I just have one. Are there any tax revenue? I mean, I think they're going to find it's going to cost the homeowner more money to fulfill these requirements. Are there tax benefits that can be initiated? Are there ways is there state money for redoing fronts? And I think that should be a very important part, not just the law, but how can we help the homeowner? Because I am telling you, the concern with the people that I've met in the historic district, they're worried about the cost.
I can respect where you're coming from as a relatively new resident. I was.
You want to come up?
Yeah, sure.
Please take the mic.
Sure. Thank you, Earl. I'm Francis O'Shea at 6 West Home Place. As a recent transplant, I was required to undertake go through the ARB process in order to make my basement compliant due to a bathroom which had magically appeared at some point in the recent past. And because that egress was on the outside of my house, I needed to get approval from the ARB for it, despite the fact that almost nobody can see it. And it was extremely frustrating at the time, and looking back, there are things that I could have done better, but I wanted to get up here and say to you that I hear where you're coming from, and if we're talking about large facades that needing to be compliant with wood siding or very expensive dormers or trim, I can't speak to that, but I would say, both from my professional and personal experience, that historic districts have a very important role in maintaining the market value of a property. And I think that whatever tax benefits may or may not accrue, and I can't speak to them, I think that we should keep in mind that keeping the historic nature of the village will make sure that all of our properties are worth more than they might be if people were allowed to throw up the crappy vinyl siding that's on my house, for instance, in the future. So I hope that we have carve-outs specifically for low-profile photovoltaic, specifically about how those conduits can be brought to the ground. And I think that there also should be specific carve-outs made for non-compliant townhouses as it applies to stuff like egresses, things that can be sort of made uniform. There'd be some way to maybe avoid having my architect have to come back several times, which I have to pay for as a homeowner. It ended up being a rather large soft cost. But with that said, I think overall, including this guide, it only clarifies for us what we need to do, and I think in the long term, it'll be to all of our benefit, despite where you're coming from. And I appreciate the cost, so thanks for saying that. Thank you very much.
Anybody else? Okay, well, that was a really pregnant pause I made, so, does anyone up here want to comment at this time?
You always start over there?
I don't want to always start over there. Oh, correspondence, yes.
Oh, yes.
Thanks, Larry. I always forget the
Oh, you
correspondence.
forgot to remind me.
I figure they're not here, so I don't know. I skipped them. No. Yeah, exactly.
There's 1 hour and 30 minutes, I'm not here.
Yeah, so Bruce Clark. I think that's the only one that's, oh no, and Joe Clark. And they're not related. First, Bruce Clark. I support adoption of design guide and recommendations as recommendations. Here's my concern. The Irvington Historic District was established in 2014. One factor supporting its establishment was the representation by its supporters that the Historic District designation was only an honor and a recognition, one that carried no additional burdens. My concern is that these recommendations and the process envisioned for their enforcement would likely result in their becoming requirements in practice. Broadly speaking, an overlapping group of interested and well-intentioned citizens and board members participated in drafting the design guide and recommendations. They will be making decisions concerning historic district properties under implementing legislation, and they are to be guided by their own design guide and recommendations in making those decisions. This could mean that there will be a comprehensive limitation on what property owners, including current property owners, may do with their own property. This is not the typical condominium situation where the rules are laid out for everybody before they consider buying into a development, but instead would be a situation in which the restrictions are being imposed after the fact on an existing community and numerous property owners. Under the proposal, the trustees will be the body of appeal for review of such decisions, and I hope that the trustees will be vigilant in maintaining an appropriate balance between village objectives and an individual's homeowner's rights. I should be clear that I would be happy if property owners studied design guide recommendations and prepare their plans accordingly, understanding that the village cares that the development or alterations of a property to be consistent with Irvington's character. It is the prospect of enforcing the design guide and recommendations involuntarily that gives me pause. As I also mentioned before, the draft June 21st, 2016 landmark legislation. Oh, this is actually not for tonight, so we'll skip that part. But again, that's Bruce Clark, who's the chairman of the ZBA. And then Joe Clark, again, no relation. As an owner of several properties in the Historic District, I'd like to go on the record as opposing the rules being proposed by the Historic District Committee. These rules will place more burden on homeowners and add additional expense to doing repairs or improvements to their homes. We already have a planning board, zoning board, and architecture review board. We know that guidelines will become rules and rules will become laws. Many of the property owners in the village are longtime owners and are on a fixed income. By adding more rules, these owners may not be able to afford to keep their homes. This could result in properties becoming run down or forcing these people from their lifelong home. The recent property tax reassessment has already placed tremendous financial burden on them. When the Historic District was proposed, the majority of the property owners were against it. The only reason it passed was due to the need of a supermajority in order to defeat the motion. The letters were sent out at the end of August when everyone was away, and we had very little time to respond. We, the room full of owners, begged the board to postpone the meeting as people were away on vacation, but they would not. We were told by the board that the meeting, and I quote, "This is only designation, there'll be no rules." Check the recording of the meeting. Yet the week after the designation was passed, a committee was formed to draw up the rules. Before any rules were passed, mailed notices should go out to every homeowner, explaining how these guidelines will affect them. Just because people are silent does not mean they're in favor of it. Most of the time it means they are not aware of it. These rules will affect the value of every home in the village. It will add months of meetings and thousands of dollars in professional fees to get simple approvals. It's getting to the point that everyone else has more say in what someone wants to do with their home than the actual homeowner. Enough is enough. We do not need more layers of bureaucracy. Joe Clark. And that is
Does anyone want to correct the misstated facts in that letter?
Sure.
Or are we just going to go on the record with stuff that's obviously what I would call,
Could you speak into the mic, please?
I was just taking umbrage at the fact that the letter proposed certain rewrite of history from what actually occurred. So it bothers me, and I'd like.
Can you clarify what you're saying on that? I don't understand.
Well, did someone write this up? Because I think at the point, I don't recall the supermajority thing, but I do know that the vote for the acceptance of the designation, it was less than 20%, 18% or something that were actually had sent back in that they were not in favor of it. So
My understanding of that was anyone that did not reply was counted as a yes.
That's true.
Is that incorrect?
That was true.
Yes, that is correct.
So if you counted only those that replied, then what is the number?
I don't think that that's how it was done. I think they just,
That's my
they
point.
took letters of.
Everyone
We didn't
got
set
a
the-
letter.
We didn't set the process. The process was set by the state.
Again, that's not the point.
But you had to opt, if you were against it, you had to opt, you had to say. If you were for it, you didn't have to say.
Exactly. So anyone
So
that did
anyone who
not
does
respond
repo-
was counted as a yes. Thus,
Correct.
those numbers are skewed.
That was the process that was set forth by the state. Is it the best process? I don't know, but that's the way the process was set up.
I think if we're gonna, go ahead. I was just gonna say, if we're gonna have a second hearing on this, we are, right?
We
We're not
are,
gonna try to
yes.
vote tonight. I mean, we can certainly get information, and clarify what happened, you know, with the response, but I have the same memory as Mark.
The other thing about the letter is definitely stated an opinion, and the fact is that there's nothing in the guidelines or the proposed linking legislation that essentially creates any other level of bureaucracy or oversight or board review that doesn't currently exist. You have to go through a planning board review for certain cases, you have to do ZBA for certain situations, and you have to do ARB for certain situations. It's not like there's another barnacle being added onto the thing. Is the process messed up in some cases? Yes. Are there a lot of issues? One of them where we talked about was the problem with the existing non-conformance of most of the historical district. In fact, a lot of what our zoning would require is exactly what you don't want to have happen in the historic district, i.e. large front yard setbacks and things like that that would destroy the character of the streetscape. So there's a lot of complicated issues, but I don't see it as adding burden to the process. I know that when there has been delays, excessive delays, and this is a thing, now I'm going to scold the village. I think the process, sometimes when these new laws get passed, like the demolition law, you know, you take it out for the first drive and there's issues in it, and there's process issues. And unfortunately, I know that the 130 main got caught in the middle of one of those situations where it was the first, you know, time to take it out and maybe a wheel was missing. I don't know. We learned something from it and we made a correction to the law, which I think filled a hole, a major gap that happened to be played out because no one thought that specific instance. So what am I trying to say?
I don't think it's changed much, the demolition law.
Well, it actually has, because there's stuff in it now that specifically addresses something like a partial demolition rather than a full building removal. And the criteria is been adjusted as well for those cases where it's a demolition for renovation rather than demolition for a completely new commercial or, you know, a completely new building. So there are changes that would address directly the kinds of questions that came up during your review.
Okay, I'll just, we're at the end of a long evening, a long process, and we've agreed that we're not going to vote on this tonight. So if I could just, as one of the, I'm sorry, as one of the newer board members who was not involved in the whole process of this ongoing, but just kind of new to this, a couple of comments. One is that what is extremely heartening is that everybody who speaks is basically in support.
Speak up, please.
Everyone has been in support of the design guidelines. People are very clearly invested in the historic character of this community and preserving that character. Everybody who has spoken about the design guidelines, including myself on the 2 or 3 times that I was here when it was presented, this is a masterpiece. The question that I'm hearing, the tension that I'm hearing is how much of it is prescriptive rather than recommendations, and what happens to recommendations when they get transformed into code.
Right.
And
Correct.
who makes the decision and by what criteria. So That's what I think we have to struggle with and better define. So we're in a good place here, I think, in that there's no disagreement in principle. I think that this, if nothing else, this document is going to be an education piece, a way to enable people new to this community or thinking about buying in this community to figure out what kind of community we have, to appreciate the history, to appreciate what has gone into keeping it the way it is. But I think what we have to look at a little bit more closely is how it gets made into code. Those are the concerns I've heard from the people who spoke tonight, from some of the letters, and that's my concern as well. Because if this is something where the ARB has a different, slightly different standard from the one that already exists to apply just to the historic district, and you feel compelled to follow those guidelines as written, and then any appeal from that is to the board, and we review de novo, that's very different than what happens in other parts of the community. Did we put that in just to make sure that these guidelines don't overtake, just kind of put people in the historic district at an extra burden? I'm not sure. I think it requires a bit more closer look on our part so that we can all do our job and all encourage the common goal that we clearly all have of valuing and encouraging and supporting the historic district that we have, and making sure that people, and I'm using the word advisedly, make those choices. Because if people choose to do it, we're in a much better place than if somebody is forced to. If I'm not sure we want to force people to spend 3 times as much for a garage door. Is that element so key to historic significance? I don't know, maybe it is. People might have different viewpoints about this. But I think we have to be very careful about what we impose, what we codify, and the decision-making and appeal process that follows.
I agree a lot with what Janice just said. I hear that there's a goal that we share, and when anybody talks about Irvington, people talk about the special character, the feel of the village, and that's something that everybody wants to preserve. The question is how to make that happen. If that's the goal and we agree on it, I think the Historic District Committee has worked these long years to not take a design guide off the shelf, but rather create one that I think, or maybe it was Pat who talked about the eclectic styles in Irvington, that you can't, you can't try, and I never heard that committee was trying to do what happens in some communities where the styles are all the same. So just because we are going to have another session about this, the things that I heard that I think the linking legislation could be clearer on, that the language could be improved, and that would be things like making it clear. Ken brought up the issue of repair. There's some language in there that if it doesn't seem clear enough that that repairs in the historic district are never have a higher standard of review than anywhere else. Repairs are repairs, and they're not supposed to be part of what the ARB does. It seems to me we could fix the language to make that more carefully said. I think there also could be language. I heard a little bit about what if the document was changed. What this committee produced was this document with the help of Steve Tilley, but how do we ensure that in the future somebody else doesn't say, okay, well let's put this, and this in the document and make it strict. So how do we keep it at the level that we've worked so hard to have and not let that happen in the future? Kind of speaking to the slippery slope issue. These are all, seems to me, things that if we understand the goal and we speak about the way the language can be adjusted, I think we can do that. I think, those are particularly the, and the thing about the cost, that is obviously a concern. And Pat brings up the issue of the cost that comes from something we're actually not talking about, but Brian mentioned the issue of all the non-compliant lots, and that has been a problem for years and years and years. That seems like something we want to solve separately, and maybe that does reduce some cost of having to go to the zoning board when to pay your architect or whoever to go to the zoning board. So that's something separate. But cost, there were two places, I know that reading the document, there are two places in the guide itself, on page 5, I think it is, and maybe it's 41 also, that in the guide that says that the ARB will consider cost, won't just consider that in some theoretical world, Leola's door might be nicer that it's all wood, but in a theoretical world, they're not forced to say, by the way it's written now, they're not forced to say, well, then that's what you have to do, because they are to consider costs. So maybe there are different materials that have an, I don't know enough about architecture. John Malone is over there. We don't have enough architects in here to answer those questions. Those are the kinds of things I think our board could work on, so that we can come back with something that meets some of the problems that we heard tonight. That's what I hope that we do. Seems to me we have our work cut out for us, and hopefully people will continue to return.
Well, in my mind, I think there certainly is no nefarious intent, on the part of the Historic District Committee to intend to dictate style and dictate cost. But cost is a real consideration here. As Mr. Riley said, not just hard costs, but there are soft costs involved. In terms of having to return, in terms of showing new types of drawings and things. I think we need to work hard. I think Mary is going to have to help us with the wording in terms of the linking legislation. I think we need to think again about perhaps the guided by wording and find some other kind of wording that will allow it to be used as a resource, but a non-binding resource. I'm concerned a lot about the costs. I'm concerned about homes in the historic district becoming so quick. The argument that it's going to improve and increase the values of these homes is probably true, and then it's going to make it less affordable for people to come in and buy these homes in the neighborhood, in Irvington. These homes have traditionally been the more affordable homes in our village, and now they may become out of sight for people to be able to purchase, not only for increased value, but for what's involved in maintaining that house. So there are a lot of considerations. I think we need to work on it. I'm glad that we're not doing anything today in terms of passing legislation, and I think we have a work cut out for us.
Mr. Gilliland?
I just think that I agree with everything that's being said. I think that there's a lot. I'm glad to take the time.
Into the microphone, please?
Yeah, I'm glad to take the time to go back in and make sure that linking legislation is crystal clear. And I think in this particular case, we should make sure that it's clear to the average Joe and not just legally clear, if you know what I'm saying. It's got to be clear from a conversational point of view. So I thought that the language was clear, but obviously a lot of people have not about that. So I think we need to just work on making it so that it's common, conversationally clear. How's that as a description? And the only other thing is I agree with everyone saying that we should not be seeing imposition of increased costs for renovation or so forth again, there are certain conditions that kick in when it's considered to be a demolition, and maybe we have to look at that again, because that's a broader issue, that's triggered in the historic district, but the issue there is that there are some additional drawings, upfront drawings required, so that there's a sense of approval for the ARB before going forward to the planning board. And finally, the other thing I think that was mentioned was the need important need to have the ARB and the planning board work together closely as projects move forward through the process, so that there's not a kind of a misfit at the end of the process where things have to loop back around again. And that obviously is not just dedicated to the or isolated to the historic district, but just in terms of a process throughout the village. We could get the groups, to get the two boards working together, maybe having them ensure people are at each other's meetings. I don't know, that's, that could work, this month you take the meeting, something like that. That's one way to have a shared informational kind of context where red flags that come up will come up sooner and can be addressed with less cost effectively.
Okay. I mean, I will add again that, to me, this is again a trade-off between property rights and preservation. I think we all agree, everyone in the village pretty much agrees that, it's our downtown is special. It makes us unique. It's part of our identity. But those are all people's homes as well, and we want to ensure that they can do what they want to do, within reason. But I think what type of reason that is, I think I always try to bend more towards the homeowner than kind of the will of the people or the will of the board, whether it's the ARB or the board of trustees. But I think most people in the historic district live there, not just because they've been there for a long time, but because they respect it and they love it and they want to do the right thing if they can. And I do think that the document, the guidelines, goes a long way into helping people understand that from the beginning. And when they're making decisions, I think it's always harder to change things at the end after you've invested a lot of time and effort and money. If you can make those more informed decisions up front, I think often the costs aren't that big a difference until you have to go back and then do it again and come back before a board again and print out 10 copies or whatever it is. 18 copies. So I think that there's a lot of that piece of it that I think this could help procedurally with. So I think we do have some wording changes to maybe loosen it up is probably the wrong term, but I think it's more flexibility, but I think it's sometimes less flexibility. To me, it's not, hey, ARB, look at the guidelines. This is what you do for a window, and that's it. It's not that. It was a recommendation. This is the best thing. What you have is not quite that. It might be okay, And I think that's softer thing. It's very hard to legislate that, though. That's the problem, And I think that's where Mary Ann's going to earn her new contract. So it all comes back to her with the words.
If we get to it.
Yeah, extra $5 an hour. But it's kind of taking a bigger step back. While we haven't gotten a lot of feedback from the public, and tonight we definitely received some more, maybe not as much as I had hoped for. I mean, I think we heard a lot more on roof blowers. But it's been thoughtful and respectful, and I think at the end of the day, we all want what's best for downtown and best for our residents, and don't want to put additional burdens on them. And I think that's the goal here, is to preserve downtown, but have people do it willingly. Not as Janice said, well, we don't want to legislate you doing what we think is the right thing for your home. We want you to look at it and say, I can and will do this, and I can afford it. And if you can't, then then hopefully we'll still work with you on doing still the best thing we can do together. And that's the goal, and it's not an easy goal. It's much easier to legislate and say, this is what you have to do, or you can do whatever the heck you want. And I don't think any of us want either of those two extremes. And now it's going to be fine-tuning that dial to find that, we always talked about that continuum this whole time. And that's why we, to me, the more public input, the better it is for us to fine tune that little dial and try to get it right out of the gate. Last word, Mark?
Yeah. Actually, he knew me too well. Okay, so the only other thing is, there was something that Bruce Clark had mentioned before that I really think we should consider, which is removing the bifurcation in the ARB review process, appeal process. I think it should go to one board, regardless of whether it's in the historic district or not. I don't think that historic district should only go to the trustees and then everything else goes to the ZBA. I think that the reason we're talking about only things that the ARB has, these are not zoning issues, these are issues of aesthetics and potentially.
We can describe, it may make sense to go through the context and the thinking for why that change was made.
Well, what I'm trying to say is, I think everything that at that level maybe everything should be coming to the trustees. We're not talking about quantitative. We're talking because everything going to typically what goes to the ZBA is things about setbacks and coverage and FAR and all this kind of stuff. So it's all very quantitative type of stuff in many cases. A lot of stuff that everything that the ARB is dealing with is qualitative, aesthetic, and fit with the community. So I don't see, anyways, that's my thing that I would like to at least discuss a little bit more, because I think Bruce Mader was very insightful when he said it's kind of odd that you would bifurcate based on just a district designation.
So we have a lot to discuss. Next time. Is it possible to not have the two continuations on the same night?
Well, we need a work session first, for sure.
Okay.
Or two.
I think we have to, after the meeting, try to work on the schedule because there's
And there's still more meetings.
Second or third.
Next.
All right, so we'll keep the public hearing open as well.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Something I think is fairly straightforward.
Mr. Mayor, may I offer the board a list of what is required currently under the current law for architectural review board review? It's interesting to see how this compares to the new guide and the responsibility of the ARB in that context, because it really doesn't change much at all, if any.
That's all. You need to go back and look at, what was ever the demolition? Pass arounds.
Hi, how are you?
Was
Nice
incorrect.
to meet
So
you.
they were
I
demolition.
think you were W2. Oh, I did, yeah.
So take a look at the updated one, because it was written precisely to address some of the issues that you were facing.
Well, you have more things to do.
Yes.
I wish we were
Quite a few more things to do.
Thank you very much.
So I was thinking we should think about it more. We should.
We're concerned that they're
Question
in
about
the village and they're worried about more regulation. Doing exactly what you want to talk about. But
Okay, very good. I can get us to Brenda.
about it
Are
too,
you
but I
riling them
just
up?
make sure I'm right.
Riley?
Are you riling them up?
No, very clever, I like that.
They don't have to be riled up, they're there. Thank you.
Bob,
Bye-bye.
Bob. As you just described this to Brian, you said they didn't want more regulation, but that's not what that says here.
Can we
So
get
it's
this
just-
distributed and then discuss it?
Yeah, because it's
10
just your
o'clock?
summary of what you said isn't really on top of that.
But it's on
Anyway, right, so you may have to explain that.
Okay.
Okay.
You ready?
Yes. Okay. Oh, my God.
Approval of the village attorney retainer agreement.
Approved. Yes.
All, second?
Aye.
Motion,
We
all in
agree.
favor?
Aye,
Aye.
worth every penny.
Welcome back, Mary Ann.
Don't get to go on, don't get to go away, no.
I don't know why you're not asking for martinis, too, just so you can be chill during the meeting.
Here's one of the expenses.
I gotta sign this one, I'll sign it tonight if you like. Award of approval. I mean, this is a good one too. Award of contract for Old Crow and Aqueduct Trailway Improvement Project.
This is a
I
very.
mean, I was very excited about it. Normal night, this would have been the big highlight.
Yes.
We were just complimenting you on clearing the room out.
Yeah, exactly. Talk so much, my breath is getting tired.
I just had one question about it. What was the subtraction column about? I must have been.
Okay, so what are we discussing now? Where are we?
The alternate, okay.
The award of contract. Old
All
Crow
right,
and
let's go back to the retainer agreement and finish that. Can we-
No, we already
did we
passed
get
it.
it?
No,
Oh,
we
we did it, okay. Okay,
I just have
okay,
to sign
good.
it.
We're
On the Croton Aqueduct
Okay, good,
Trailway.
okay. That was, we all approved, right? Okay.
So the bid came in, the alternate is actually to deduct certain elements that were, and things like striping that could be done in a more permanent way, but we were concerned about cost, so we had the option of removing those elements and replacing it with paint rather than some, special applied material to
For the crosswalks, you mean?
no, the crosswalks are brick.
Yeah.
But markings in the Aqueduct parking lot, there's a few other elements, I don't have them in front of me.
Yeah,
but-
right.
And we're not making a decision. We are awarding based upon the base bid, but we still have the option to remove certain elements from the contract if we wish. This just gave us some flexibility because we really were concerned about costs, but the costs these numbers here are very good. We're satisfied with them.
And Larry, maybe mention some of the background work you did on Tony Caselli.
Yeah, so, yeah, no one in our engineering
Good thing it
firm.
worked, too, Larry.
Yeah, no one in our engineering firm had worked with them, but they did check out the references, they all checked out well. We actually did have a direct personal connection in my office with another village that did a lot of work with them, and our contact there said that this job is actually right up their alley. So that, in their opinion, it was the village of Bronxville who said that. And that's it. It's within our budget, and they still have a few I's to dot and T's to cross with respect to the New York State grant requirements. But it's all just paperwork. But rather than delay anything, we want to get this contract awarded. We have to work out some details, but we want to be able to move forward before the next meeting. So we're trying to get a good portion of this work done during the summer when the school's out.
Yeah.
I'm actually very excited about this one.
Yeah.
Whereas sealed bids were received and opened on May 24, 2017 at 11 a.m. in Village Hall as follows. Tony Caselli, Inc., total base bid $374,000, total alternate deduct $39,050, total base minus alternate $334,950. That was the low bidder. The other ones were all higher. Whereas the Village Board administrator, there was 5 total received. Whereas the village administrator reviewed the bid submitted and determined that the lowest bidder is in order and responsive to specifications. Now therefore be it resolved to award the contract for 2017-10 for Old Croton Aqueduct Trailway Improvement Project in the amount of $374,000 to Tony Caselli, Inc., and to authorize the village administrator to execute said contract. I'll make the motion. Can I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. Is there a time, is there any kind of penalty for going over time on this one?
I believe we have.
Because of the school district?
I believe we have liquidated damages built in.
Yeah, okay,
Yes.
just wondering. I think you had mentioned that before. so.
Next.
Approval of easement agreement for the property adjacent to 170 Mountain Road.
So, I'm sorry?
Let me explain this why
Go
we're
ahead.
here. This is the guy who's wall, and I know we talked about a license agreement. But I wanted the thing to be able to run with the land because particular, to me, the most important provisions for the village were that they have to keep the wall in good repair and keep any rocks from spilling down, and also to make the village, to indemnify the village if anything goes. Licenses can't run with the land, easements do. So I did this by way of easement. The most important provisions are, that they can keep it there, that the village can terminate it on 3 months' notice if they need it, at which time they have to pull the wall off the property. It's really unlikely to happen. And they have to, the property owner is solely responsible for maintaining and retaining the wall and should use its best efforts to prevent any rocks, stones, or dirt from sliding down. If they don't, the village can tell them to do it. If they don't do it in 30 days, the agreement is over with. And then they have to have insurance protecting the village from any slippage, name the village as an additional insured in the Hampton Indemnified Village. Those provisions you couldn't really have, as I got more about it, you couldn't have in a license agreement. So I drafted an easement agreement, which will be filed in county land records, so anybody who buys the property will be buying it
Signed
subject to
into
this.
these, excellent, excellent.
And they're paying us $1,500.
For Mary Ann's time.
Yeah, it was, that just came so good for my bills on it.
Should we make it 1550 with the new contract?
One quick thing, in the resolution itself, it probably should give authorization, is it just to me, or do you need authorization, Mary Ann, to any other documents that are necessary to complete the transaction?
Yes, just authorize the village administrator and
To execute?
village attorney to execute the agreement, yeah. Take whatever steps are necessary to execute and file the agreement.
Got it, okay.
Got that.
All right.
Yeah, got it.
Got it. Shorthand.
Resolved to approve the easement agreement for the property adjacent to 170 Mountain Road and to authorize the village administrator and village attorney to execute said agreement and any additional documents needed to complete said transaction. Good enough. I'll make a motion. Second. All in favor?
Aye.
The old capital budget.
Well, I mean, I could, this is the new capital.
Yeah,
Exactly.
right, this is a new version. Really, there's two changes to this. I wouldn't call them super significant, although they are two important pieces of equipment. We moved, at the request and suggestion of Greg, our DPW superintendent, we moved the sanitation truck out one more year, but it probably could go even more. And the reason is that Greg, in a very quiet rollout, has reduced down the number of garbage routes that there are from 3 down to 2. It doesn't affect residents in the schedule that they put their garbage out, but instead of having 3 separate routes with 3 separate crews, there are now only 2, given some of the changes in the department and the decrease in volume and other things. So he's been...
When did you roll that out?
June 1st. So...
Is that why
Worked well for the first 3 days.
organic debris pickup dates were changed as well?
Forget the truck.
Because they were shifted around.
I didn't understand the question or the answer. What was the question?
Oh, I was just, we got notice that the organic debris, yard debris pickup dates had changed around for North and South Village.
I don't remember if they're connected. But anyway, it does push off and delay the purchase of certain replacement equipment. So it's still an ongoing process, but we are moving that out at least a year. The second item is that we had originally thought that by the time the fire department successfully went out to bid and placed an order for a new fire truck, that it would be at least the following fiscal year until there was a payment made, so we had pushed that out a year, not meaning that we were slowing the process down, just more accurately reflecting the timing. And they corrected us and said that there is a possibility that it will be delivered in this upcoming fiscal year. So it really, we did put that into, we moved this back into this upcoming year as opposed to one more year out. The reality of that is that if it turns out that by the time Brenda has to borrow the money in November, if it turns out we have a better picture of the exact timing, we still can delay the borrowing by a year. But just for purposes of projection, we wanted to give you what I guess you call worst case scenario, is that the money's owed in this upcoming year. So those were the two changes that were made. All of the other analyses that we talked about in terms of how to pay for this, those decisions don't have to be made tonight, but recognize that that there's going to be an impact in the tax rate based upon these borrowings if you stick to this, and that you'll probably need to do something in order to remain compliant with the tax cap. But again, those decisions don't need to be made until the upcoming budget cycle next year.
But we discussed
we discussed the concept of using
right.
fund balance now, and then in a future year, probably about 3 years from now, I think it was, you'd have a chance to reverse that use.
Right.
and I think, practically with, almost a definite interest rate rise by the Fed in June, there's probably going to be a second one. So, probably sooner in the second half of the year that we start the funding. I think we talked about November, but
Yeah, our ban doesn't come due until November, and I believe it's 60 days. We can't refund it
until
closer than, earlier than 60 days, I think it is.
Yeah, so I'm saying it might be a good idea to do it kind of as early as possible in the process. Is my, my crystal ball's always foggy, but.
I need the audit done earlier than too, for the financials. They're scheduled for September to audit.
Yeah, we should, even if we have a draft by then, we can still go to the market.
That's just an aside.
Good.
Although the percentages come up.
So the next, again, trying not to dwell on this, what if you are in agreement with this capital budget and you decide that you'd like to pass it, after this, the next step would be for our bond council to prepare the bond resolutions that are necessary to effectuate the first year of this plan, meaning the 2017-18 borrowings that are here. So essentially, that's the only thing, that's the point in time when you are committing to those projects. The projects that are out in the future, although they're part of your plan, you still have an opportunity to change those. But the upcoming year is what we would be focusing on, and then what we would expect to have is at the next meeting, you'll have a very long list of very long resolutions, which you're welcome to read word for word, but they will authorize Brenda to borrow the projects that you've agreed to here. Okay.
At a competitive rate.
Well, yeah,
obviously.
Yeah, that timing, you're delegating the timing, the authority to do that to Brenda.
I feel comfortable with this. If we move one thing in or one thing out, I don't think, it's not going to make it bad. I think we have a solid plan we discussed at the work session. With the two changes you highlighted, they don't quite cancel each other out. They help.
Like the rest of your Martin's Jim stay.
Yes, exactly right. We might need to borrow like $6 million.
I think it's very astute on Greg Nilsson's part to notice this, and I would appreciate it.
As always, yeah.
Yes.
Always.
So, I'll make a motion to approve the 2017 capital budget. Can I get a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. I didn't oppose it, I was sitting there. Mark wasn't very loud, I don't know who was contemplating.
No, I said.
Oh, you did, okay.
Didn't register on my decibel meter.
We should have one of those. Press the button.
Okay. Yay.
Approval of a temporary construction easement agreement with Mercy College and Hudson House Tenants Corporation, another exciting village project.
Yeah.
This is a milestone.
I'm sorry?
We had two big
Well,
ones.
it's a piece to the puzzle. It's
Yeah,
not
it's
the
a
final
piece, yeah,
piece. This
right.
has a lot of moving parts, as Mary Ann knows. Bless you. There are actually there are actually three different components that need to fall in line before that project can get started. One component is what's in front of you, which is a temporary easement agreement between Hudson House, Mercy College, and the village. Hudson House owns a piece of land, bless you, that we will need to enter upon in order to build the sidewalk. The sidewalk, most of the sidewalk is not on their property, a little bit is, but but there is work that has to be done on their property in order to do it. That's what this agreement's about. Bless you. There are two other. I'm just happy you got your budget passed. There are two other agreements that I won't go into any detail, but just so you understand, there needs to be an agreement between the village and Mercy College covering the maintenance and operation of that sidewalk, and also covering the financial arrangement on who's doing the construction, how much are we paying, how much is Mercy paying, and all those details. We have a draft of that. We don't have an agreement with them yet, but that's, we've been slow to negotiate that. The third component is that Mercy College needs to obtain from Metro North a work permit because they need to enter upon Metro North's property in order to do this work as well. So, it's not a simple project. We still have hopes and desires to get this done this summer because if we don't, there's an enormous parking issue that's created, because we'll be doing work right in front of parking spaces that we know are oversubscribed. So but we can't push any more than we've been pushing. That's the only thing I can say. And when you have Metro North involved, they've been enthusiastic about it, but it doesn't mean that they approve a work permit quickly. So it's just taking time. So this is the first component.
I'm just really not good at visualizing things. Where exactly is this path going?
It's going from the southern end of the Metro North pathway, Metro North platform, excuse me.
Right.
The platform, there's a pathway already there, and it goes from that point along Hudson Road West up to the Mercy College existing pathway.
Okay, is it on the car park side?
Yes.
Oh, okay, that's what I thought.
It's in front of the cars, but
That's
where
right, that's what I thought.
there's a hill,
Okay.
that's going to be cut back.
Gotcha.
It'll be off of,
Gotcha.
there'll be a gap between the cars and the sidewalk.
Okay, that's
With
what I thought it was.
lighting and an 8-foot wide pathway, not just a simple 4-foot sidewalk. They want they want it to look like part of Mercy College campus, which is great for us.
Mercy College campus, movie sets, all
Whatever, right,
It'll help enhance this
So-
space. No, this is good.
Projects coming.
Resolved to approve the temporary construction easement agreement with Mercy College and Hudson House Tenants Corporation for the construction of a sidewalk along Hudson Road West, and to authorize the mayor to execute said agreement. I'll make the motion. Can I have a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Aye. Reports, brief reports of board standing committees and officers. Trustee liaison reports. Mr. Gilliland.
Well, I'm going to do what you suggest and cede my time to keep, because it's late.
Dr. Larry Lonke.
I'll just mention there's a CAB meeting tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. And Joe did ask me to say a special thank you to the beautification committee for the summer planting that was done today, up and down Main Street. There is a softball game Wednesday night, sponsored by WFAN. Boomer Esiason and Phil Sims will be.
Okay, so the highway department and the water department have been working very hard, and we appreciate their work.
Perfect.
And the fire department has assisted in 3 calls, one mutual aid to Dobbs Ferry for a house fire, called Dobbs Ferry for a carbon monoxide incident in Field Point, responded mutual aid to Hastings for house fire, continued training and maintenance, and participated in Touch a Truck Day at the library. And I'm just starting to get village court reports and summary of the types of cases handled, which I will be reporting on regularly, but at this point for the past, from 5/15 to now, there were 53 charges in various categories and 47 infractions.
Village administrators report.
I just have a half a dozen items. So, no, one quick thing. The Village Officials Committee met last week, and one of the tasks that we had was to coordinate suggestions for shared services amongst our villages. The county is just beginning the process of the shared service property tax savings function that was passed in the state budget. And there's a meeting for the mayor to attend. Apparently, it's only the mayor that can attend.
No delegates.
No, apparently not. And that's on June 15th. And in advance of that, the county asked for suggestions for shared service savings. And the Village Officials Committee got their heads together, agreed upon a coordinated group of savings ideas, and we sent it in today. You'll have a copy of that in your Friday folder.
Where does Brian get to go for this?
The county center. County center.
Oh, not Mar-a-Lago or... Okay.
It should be interesting. Politics will be fantastic. Yeah. Village clerk treasurer's report.
The tax bills were sent out late last week, Thursday and Friday, to all the residents, and we were able to, there were a lot of settlements done by Greenberg for those SCARs, small claim assessment reviews. We're able to do the ones we were given by Greenberg, so that ended up in giving more correct bills to our residents and not having to refund to them. That was a good thing. We start our preliminary audit tomorrow. Auditors are coming.
Excellent. Village attorney's report. Public comment. Last chance. Review of action items? Rework all of our laws?
Yeah.
Work it all out.
Work
Set up a
sessions.
schedule.
Right.
No, there's nothing specific.
I will make a motion to adjourn. Can I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.